Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські Російські танкісти сховались з кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Ті, хто води всяке озброєння, різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів. Робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там пихцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить. Хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар? Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ. Тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, everybody. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 220 of the news.
And of course, we're going to be reporting on the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine. And tonight we have big news, and literally big news, as the entire 5th Russian army has been confirmed to be surrounded in the city of Lyman, meaning that anywhere in between 10,000 to 15,000 Russian soldiers are within this city, starving, fighting, and losing ground as we speak. And with that bombshell, it's time to start off tonight's news, specifically in the Lyman area, starting off with a little bit of footage from the eastern side of the city, as the Ukrainians are playing over megaphone from vehicles a message to urge the Russians to surrender while they can in Lyman. Here's the video of that message, and also some of the captured outposts that are on the very outskirts of the village.
Силы обороны Украины захватили Лиман. Дальнейшее сопротивление не имеет смысла. Вы окружены. Для того, чтобы сдаться, вам необходимо выйти на ближайшую дорогу или населенный пункт, сложить оружие, дождаться представителей вооруженных сил Украины, с поднятыми руками сдаться в плен.
Покинута мотолига російська, і наші хлопці їх забирають.
Помните, своей власти вы не нужны. Для них вы пушечное мясо. Вы нужны своим близким людям.
And with that, that's the end of that video. And real quick, just to give a little bit more of an explanation as to what's happening in Lyman, the 5th Combined Arms Army of the Red Banner, I believe, has been surrounded in Lyman. Now, if we pull this army up, the 5th Combined Arms Army, we'll get a little bit of history. Now, let's talk about this specific army that's been surrounded inside of Lyman. So, as we can see, a little bit of history here. It was formed in 1939 during the Soviet invasion of Poland that year, which was also at the exact same time as the German invasion of Poland. After that, trying to make sure that I get the history summarized as best as possible, they also participated in the defense of the Soviet Union during Operation Barbarossa. But if we scroll down a little bit, we'll actually see that... Hang on, I'm trying to find the specific part here. Let's see here. Let's see. Trying to find it specifically. Oh, yes, here it is. The German forces on the 9th of September, the 20th of September, captured the entire 5th Combined Arms Army along with the 21st, 26th, 38th, and 37th Armies during the Battle of Kiev. Is that ironic or what, Matthew?
That is ironic.
That is really ironic. And also, another note is that the entire army, just to get the story a little bit straighter, the entire army has not been surrounded. Apparently, only 3 brigades of the 5th Combined Arms Army ended up in Ukraine, and of those, we know for certain that the 57th Separate Guards Motor Rifle Brigade is one of them. There is also, from what we're assuming, one of the other motor rifle divisions or motor rifle brigades, either the 127th Motor Rifle Division or the 70th Separate Guards Motor Rifle Brigade. And then we believe, although this hasn't been confirmed, that they were accompanied by the 305th Artillery Brigade. Although we're not entirely certain, most likely that's the highest possibility. It gives these motor rifle brigades artillery support that is integrated, I guess you could say, into their larger combined arms army structure, but at the same time it could have been any brigade. That's a very large assumption that some people have been making, and I feel like it's well-founded, and so I'm saying it here, but take that one with a grain of salt. But what we do know is that 2 entire infantry brigades are most likely in Ukraine, accompanied by a support brigade, I guess you could say, and apparently 2 or 3 of them have been surrounded in Lyman. Now, just in case people do not know, the average size of a Russian brigade is somewhere around 3,000 to 5,000 men. And so, if we were to assume that one of these brigades was encircled in Lyman, that could be anywhere in between 3,000 to 5,000 soldiers of the 5th Combined Arms Army that are surrounded. If there's 2 of them, that number goes up to 6 to nearly 10,000. If it's all 3 of the brigades that have somehow been surrounded in Lyman, it could be anywhere in between 9 to 15,000 Russian soldiers that have been surrounded in the city of Lyman. This is unbelievable news. In fact, this is the biggest encirclement of any side's forces so far in this war. In fact, the encirclement of the forces in Lyman, the supposed numbers, are bigger than the amount of Ukrainians that were encircled during the siege of Mariupol. That gives you an idea of how many Russian soldiers are having to share this tiny amount of ground that is near Lyman, which we'll go to here. And real quick, since it seems like the Battle of Lyman is going to be taking a little bit of a dark turn for the Russians, let's see if we can cut down the layers and see what they're going to be dealing with. So as we can see, the land around Lyman is incredibly flat, except down here on the southern end, and also kind of wrapping around, I guess you could say, the eastern side, the southeastern side of Lyman, in a bit of a bowl. This is something of a ridgeline. A very small one at that, but still there. This ridgeline overlooks the village, and that's where a large amount of the Ukrainian forces are. And so the Russians find themselves on the low ground where they can be fired at and seen constantly. Not only that, that doesn't even matter anymore, as the Ukrainians have also surrounded them from the north and western sides as well. And so the entire brigade, the 57th Motorized Rifle Brigade, which is one that we definitely know is in Lyman, and the other 2nd or 3rd Brigade that is there, have now been completely encircled and will be fighting in this tiny village. There's not really a lot of ground for them to defend on, and if we look at their defenses, let's, real quick, we haven't done this in a long time because we haven't had the liberty to do this, but we're going to make some predictions about how the siege will go if the Ukrainians have to start fighting street by street for it. We'll discuss the Russian defensive positions and where they will most likely fortify them. And so the first place is the rail yard. And also we're going to be deleting this little square. It just says that the combined army has been surrounded, but we're going to outline the defensive positions. And so one defensive position that I see that would be the most obvious is to line up a defensive line along this rail yard. Not on the far end, but on the opposite end. The Ukrainian forces would have to cross a decent amount of somewhat open ground in that area, considering it's a large open rail yard, and so this would make a great defensive position for the Russians. So we'll put that down as defensive line. We'll put that there, and then we'll also make a little red line right about there. And that also protects largely their main road. They will also be protecting the larger main roads that go into the town from all directions. And so it appears that on this side, it's the Volitsia Street. So we'll make sure to mark that. It most likely will be somewhere... I feel like the Russians would probably like to try and create a defensive perimeter that surrounds the entire town and doesn't even allow the Ukrainians to get into the streets. But at the same time, this is such an exposed road in this area, and if we look at it on Google Maps, it's surrounded by nothing but forest, and so infantry, with somewhat relative ease, could most likely make it by the checkpoint. It would be in a pretty tough spot. It would probably get hit heavily. So I would believe that a checkpoint would be set up around here, or at least, I guess you could say, some kind of a post. So we'll put that about right here. That is also a little defensive position. Defensive position. And we'll highlight this one real quick as well. There we go. And so right now we have the rail yard and the Volitsa Street. And moving on down, we can see the T0514. And if we look at this side of the town, once again, it's a very bad defensive position. It's surrounded by forests, which is largely, I guess you could say, where the infantry goes. You do not want to push armor through forests where you don't really know if the enemy is or isn't, because infantry can be hiding in the trees right by the road, and if a tank drives by with its poor optics and not really able to see what's around it all too well, these things could get destroyed quite easily. And so the Russians most likely wouldn't want to move tanks and infantry out into these woods, as it would most likely be a very indefensible position. So once again, they're almost pushed right back into the city itself, and we'll be setting up a defensive line probably around the other Volitsa Street, which is called Volitsa Okolitsa. So we'll put a little defensive line right here. And we'll put defensive line. And of course, once again, these are all just simple predictions. We don't know if this is going to be accurate or not. In the earlier parts of the war, the predictions that I made were fairly accurate, but at this point, considering that we're now no longer trying to predict where the Russians will go, we're trying to predict where the Russians are, it may be a little bit more difficult for me to do, and so these may not be as accurate. And now, the elephant in the room is two areas that are left in this town. There's the northern end that appears to be facing into the fields, and then there is the southern, western end of the town that appears to be largely around the rail yard, and it also extends on both sides. And this would be a very tough decision to make as a defending force. This little area is densely packed with little village houses, dachas, I guess you could call them, and they're in the shape of a peninsula. This peninsula means that the Ukrainians could surround this thing in this forest line on a bit of this ridge. You can even see the ridge right here because of the shadows that are being cast by the trees. And then they could be attacked from all sides. And there's, of course, forest on the other side as well, although these houses are very sparsely, I guess you could say, placed. If I was a defender, I would give up that entire side of the town, and I would make a defensive line across this railroad track here, because that seems to be about the best place. So, once again, I'll put a line down right here. And this one's going to extend probably all the way to the Lyman Lake, or at least have some kind of line of sight towards the lake. So we'll put a defensive line here. Click save. Highlight that real quick. And so finally, the last one, which is probably going to be the most difficult one for them to defend, is the northern end. There's no forest lines or tree lines there at all, and while tree lines are to the disadvantage of the Russians, they also serve as a bit of an advantage, as it doesn't allow for, I guess you could say, easy movement of the Ukrainian forces either, and so it's going to be a lot easier to defend. However, these open fields, the Russians can't really hide any of their forces in. They can't be right on the edge of it because they'll be seen. So what do? And I've got to be honest with y'all, I'm not entirely sure. If we remember anything of how the Russians pushed into the town, they actually pushed into it off of the Heroiv Desantnikiv street here. And then they pushed towards Lyman Lake and split the Ukrainian forces into two, nearly encircled them, and then the Ukrainians conducted a retreat. So going off of that, and knowing that the Russians are ones to repeat the same thing over and over, we're going to put a defensive line right on the edge of this town, right on that street. It seems like the Russians would be thinking that that would probably be the smartest thing. And also, it looks like there's the potential for a supply depot here. Hopefully the Ukrainians have already destroyed that if it was one. But we're going to be putting a little defensive line right here. And we're going to give it a little bit of a wraparound on the northern end of the town. And so we'll put the defensive line right there. And this defensive line most likely would work, even if they didn't have Russian forces in other areas of the town, I guess you could say, like this large gaping area right here, because it is, as far as we can tell, nothing but open fields. And some of these don't even have the distinction of tree lines in between them. In fact, all of these don't. And so this defensive line right here, if they had anything like a ATGM, like a Concours or anything, they could probably shoot across the fields, about at a range of 2 miles. And so, in fact, they could cover that entire field with an ATGM. That would be possible. So these are most likely the defensive positions that the 5th Combined Arms Army have taken inside of the city of Lyman, and now it's a matter of time to wait. Are the Ukrainians going to starve out these forces into surrendering, or are they going to try and ruthlessly, I guess you could say, weed them out of the town to show the Russians that they mean business, and of course cause another propaganda failure for the Russians? That's probably going to be...
I vote for option A.
I vote for option A as well. That's actually a good point by Matthew. If the Ukrainians wait for the Russians to starve themselves out, if these are their defensive positions, they're not even going to matter in the end, because they will run out of food first. And while they may have plenty of ammunition, we're not entirely sure. They most likely are quite sparsely, I guess you could say, supplied. It doesn't matter if they have ammunition if they can't eat. And so they will be surrendering most likely within days, if not weeks, and the Ukrainians will most likely just play the waiting game here and wait that out. So still, I bet y'all can see that it's very nice to see that the 5th Combined Arms Army, specifically the 57th Brigade, is now stuck in Lyman, and the Ukrainians have made sure that there's no way out for them at all, because some people may ask, well, what if they try to conduct a breakout? And they can't. According to our information, the Russian front line is now 16 miles away, and there's no roads conducive to the entire 2 brigades that are most likely stuck in Lyman leaving the city and driving out without there being literally an endless convoy that the Ukrainians can create a highway of death with. And so with that, they are stuck. There is no way out for them, and the Ukrainians will most likely wait it out until they surrender. Incredible news, and I hope y'all all like it as well. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on into our next segments of news surrounding the city of Lyman, and we will also be coming back to Lyman in the future and revisiting these front lines to see if these predictions were accurate or not. And if they were, it gives us a pretty good idea that once again, Russian, I guess you say offensive and defensive strategies are quite predictable, and anyone can predict them. I'm doing this based off of what we've seen so far in the war, and also what seems to be the most logical. And if I, once again, a 20-year-old college student, am able to predict this correctly, that tells you about how stupid an average Russian commander is. With that, we're now moving on into the area of Popivka, where we saw 2 Russian BTR-82s firing through a tree line, trying to screen for the Russian forces that are now desperately trying to defend the ground that they're rapidly losing. And so, here's the video. We see the BTRs. Also, notice that this one has the victory parade markings on it. The, I guess you say, the victory ribbon and the red star. That's always indicative of a Russian military parade unit or a military parade vehicle. When you see the BTR-82s firing through the tree line, you see it continuing to fire, and I just don't really see a lot happening here. It looks like 2 BTR-82s that are just firing at nothing. And they continue to fire the guns. This time, oh, wait a minute, we finally heard something fired at the Russians. It whizzed right over their head. You can hear it right here. Ooh.
That cartoon sound.
Yeah, that cartoon whistling noise. Let's listen to that one more time.
It's like Bugs Bunny just shot at them.
Oh, looks like the Ukrainian artillery is finally coming in on them.
Ответочку чуть не получил.
And here comes another round. Very close nearby. And that's the end of the video. And it's nice to see that the Ukrainians are still raining down artillery fire on Russian forces wherever they rear their heads. And it's really good to see that these BTR-82s are not conducting any kind of failed offensive operations anymore. They're now conducting failed defensive operations of the failing war in general that's occurring in Ukraine now. And it's wonderful to see. I love it, and I hope that y'all have enjoyed that little clip as well. Of course, we didn't really hear a lot of return fire until the very end, and it tells you that the Russians are not really having too great of a time. And of course, the BTRs had very little spacing. They looked like they were about 30 or 40 yards apart, meaning that once the artillery is able to get one of them, it's most likely going to get the second one rather quickly. With that, we're now moving on into the next clip of news, further up the front lines towards the area of the town of Kupanki, where we can see that the Ukrainians destroyed 3 tanks in total. And these tanks were knocked out by Ukraine's 3rd Tank Brigade. You can see that the 3s are starting to line up. And we're going to have to mute that. But we see one of the 3rd Brigade's tanks there firing shells at a pretty high angle towards the Russians. And we can now see that one of the tanks just got hit. We now see the black smoke of death. We now see the view of the tank firing again from the inside. We can also see that autoloader in action. We see another tank get destroyed on drone. And would you look at that? Russian tanks are going up like there's no tomorrow. If y'all have ever wanted kindling for your winter fires, then the Russian tanks are what you need. They go up like a match. With that, that's the end of that little bit of news. And once again, great to see that the Ukrainians are not giving the Russians any kind of reprieve, even in a retreat like this. Moving on over to the area of Borova, we did see that the 95th Brigade also hit some T-72s of their own, knocking these out as well. And here's some like techno music or something. We're going to mute that. But you can see little scattered bits of Russian tank all over the road, and the T-72 continues to slowly back up. It appears that the tank may have already lost control. We can see something dangling from the top of it. The tank continues to back up. It's going off-road at this point, nearly. And it appears... Oh, wait a minute. Hang on. It looks like it'd been hit by an artillery shell, and pieces of it went flying off, and the crew was dazed or stunned, and the tank had been put into reverse. But now it appears that some kind of an AT weapon flew in from the right side of the screen and hit the left side of the tank, sending pieces flying. And that tank is now coming to a dead stop. Actually, no, the driver is still in there doing something. But now we can see the driver climb out. He's decided that he has driven it for too long. It's time to leave. He now hops off the back of the tank, and he's on his way back to Belgrade. With that, that's the end of that video, and it's nice to see that the Ukrainians are double-dipping the chip in a way. If you know the Seinfeld reference, you know. They hit it with artillery, and then they hit it with an AT weapon. A 2-in-1 combination that appears to be quite effective. And so with that, that's the end of that video, and we're going to be moving on to our last bit of news from this counteroffensive area, where we can see it's a swing and a miss as a Russian fighter jet tries to attack the Foreign Legion forces with dumb bombs, but ends up dropping them straight into the lake. And so here's the video of this embarrassing miss. Also, real quick to explain this, there's the Russian jet, just in case if you didn't realize it, and you're about to see the bombs in the lake. Ugh. Now you see the Foreign Legion soldiers just looking around. Like, what in the world? We hear the sound of the jet engine still.
I did! Yeah! I got the Russians.
That was almost like a reaction.
Was
like
he holding a beer?
Yeah, wait a minute, I think it's something else, like an energy drink or something. But
Still the legend. He didn't drop it.
yeah, he didn't drop it. And also another thing is I love how they act like it's America's funniest home videos, like they're about to submit this. They're like, I got that on video. But let's play that again.
I did! Yeah! I got
Legends.
The Bro!
And so
The
that,
orcs really hate nature really badly. Can you imagine the amount of fish that killed?
oh man, talk about grenade fishing. That's like grenade fishing gone extreme. That's Fab
It's like,
500 fishing.
Trees, fish, and poor innocent animals are the main casualty here.
Yes, they are. And also, another funny thing that you pointed out pretty well, Matthew, is how that Russian jet... Well, actually, not the Russian jet, sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself here. I'm about to get to the next thing I'm about to say. But it's hilarious how these guys treated this whole thing like it was just a fun escape for the day. Just a fun little adventure. I love how the guy was running back. He's like, yeah, let's go. We got it on camera. Like, this whole interaction here was hilarious.
I did! Yeah!
Like, this is just hilarious. And I love that.
Crazy.
It is, and I love that American Foreign Legion members are over there having a good time. You know, of course, a lot of people before this war, if you remember growing up as a kid, there were people who said, war is a terrible thing. No one has fun in war. But I gotta tell you, the Ukrainian Armed Forces and the Foreign Legion members always look like they're at a party or something. It's a war going on around them, and the morale is just never not there. It's never missing. These guys would make you think that going to war is like an actual fun adventure or something.
I got the Russians.
And then he says, I got the Russians, like it would be someone else, like the Chinese or anything. But with that, that's the end of the video. And also, real quick, some of y'all might be saying, well, the Russians are poorly trained, and that's why they didn't drop the bombs on target. And oh, buddy, it gets worse than that. The Russians are terribly trained. In case if y'all don't know, that plane, I'm assuming it's probably an Su-27, it has something inside of it called a bomb site computer. The bomb sight computer, when turned on, switches to heads-up display. I'll show you all that. The SU-27 HUD. Not the one from DCS. I'm talking about the one that's real. Come on now. I guess DCS will get the point across. I guess that'll work. So you can see here the HUD. This shows the aircraft's airspeed, altitude, all that crap. Y'all, I bet y'all all know what a heads-up display is. Everyone ogled about these things as kids. But built into these heads-up displays is a bomb sight computer. And when this thing is turned on, it tells the pilot, even if these are dumb bombs that are not smart, you know, that guide themselves to the target, it will tell the pilot exactly where these dumb bombs will fall, right on this HUD. All they have to do is go at a bit of a shallow dive, and there will be this little pipper that pops up somewhere on the HUD that shows them where those bombs will fall. They then pull the trigger, the bombs drop off the plane, and they fall towards their target and then explode on impact. Somehow, this Russian idiot that dropped these bombs couldn't even get the HUD right, and he dropped it when the pipper was apparently in the lake instead of on the Ukrainians. That is the epitome of poor training and incompetence.
Now, Enforcer, go back to that video for just a second and rewind it to the soldier.
Oh, got you. Real quick, we'll get right back there. All right, so we're going to play it from here.
I did.
Okay, now pause it.
Yes.
Pause it on the soldier.
There we go.
So I'm being told this looks like me. I don't really see the resemblance.
Does this look like Matthew?
Ferris Bueller goes to Ukraine.
Ferris Bueller in Ukraine with a Four Loko in his hands.
Yes.
Oh man. But yeah, I mean, like maybe. I mean, like that may. I don't really see the similarity too much. Rather than the hair kind of looks similar, but it does look a little bit ruffled too. But kind of, I guess, clean shaven. Yeah, you know, it's kind of got the attributes, but I don't know, live chat. Does that look like Matthew or not? It looks like we're actually getting some mixed answers here.
Yeah, it's half and half, it looks like.
Actually, now it looks almost like a unanimous yes, nearly. Yeah, everyone's saying it looks like you. That's weird.
All right. So, folks, this is actually footage from when I went to Ukraine and yelled yeehaw on the camera. Just letting you know. Not really.
but with that's the end of that little video. And once again, getting back to the bomb site, that shows you the level of incompetence that the Russians really have. That they're not even capable of getting a bomb site computer and reading it off correctly. It's literally made to be the easiest thing to use. Yet they screwed that up too. And so with that, that's the end of our little segment of news from the counteroffensives that's been going on in Ukraine recently in the Lyman direction. And with that, we're now going to take y'all to our favorite place, Russia, to show y'all what's been going on here. Starting off with a return to the Squid Games, where we can see that the Russians are now fighting like the Squid Game people did in that show. And so with that, here's the video of the free-for-all. They're climbing over each other, getting in fights. When you see this man right here wearing the Abibas tracksuit with the one giant stripe. They're shouting at each other, getting in fights nearly. Most of them are probably drunk.
It's always the guy in the tracksuit.
It's always the guy in the tracksuit. Also, did you see how offended he looked when someone actually touched his tracksuit right here? Watch this. He's not even worried about getting shoved. He's looking down like, not my tracksuit, bleed. Oh man. But anyways, that's another look at one of the Russian Squid Game buildings that have been made inside of Russia as they continue to conscript hundreds of thousands of soldiers that they have absolutely no means to provide for, either through training, actual, I guess you could say, shelter, or anything else. And you can see that the conditions are worsening. These guys will end up killing each other before they end up killing a single Ukrainian. With that, we're now going to be moving into Moscow and on to our next major amount of news today, beyond the Fifth Army being surrounded, where we can see that Russia officially annexed Ukrainian land. And just to go through that again, in case y'all don't know, the referendum went through, and of course it was a resounding yes to join the Russian Federation in all four oblasts. Luhansk voted 99% to join, Donetsk voted 98%. Zaporizhia, I believe, voted 97 or 96%, and Kherson was 93%. Very low turnout in Kherson for the yeses. But still, all of them, according to the Russians, joined today, and we can see Vladimir Putin trying to officiate this inside of Moscow today. And so here's a quick little look at that. All right, and so, without further ado, here's the video. Also, I can't stand the stupid goose step that the guards do. Like, that just looks ridiculous. Look at that.
Благодарю вас, пожалуйста. Прошу. Прошу вас. Уважаемые граждане России, граждане Донецкой и Луганской народных республик, жители Запорожской и Херсонской областей, депутаты Государственной Думы. И это, конечно, их право, их неотъемлемое право, которое закреплено в первой статье Устава ООН, где прямо сказано о принципе равноправия и самоопределения народов. Повторю, это неотъемлемое право людей. Оно основано на историческом единстве, во имя которого побеждали поколения наших предков.
Now, real quick, we're not going to play this entire thing because it's Radio Free Europe's, I guess you could say, synopsis of what's going on. But one thing I'd like to say is that for Putin to hate the West so much, he has taken literal words and ripped them almost clean out of, I guess you could say, some of America's most famous defining articles and documents, like the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and started using phrases from them to try and make this seem as legitimate as possible to the Russian public. And so let's go through again and listen to these statements. Of course, it is their right, their inalienable right, much like you would say in the Declaration of Independence, which was given in Article 1 of the United Nations Charter. And the United Nations General Secretary just came out today and said that this was illegal, so who even knows what Putin's talking about? He doesn't even get support from NATO. Where equal rights and self-determination are clearly described. Sounds like bogus to me. I don't know about y'all, but doesn't really sound like this is some honest talk. And also, look at this guy. Anyways, moving on from that. This is an illegal move by the Russians, clearly. And the real honest answer is that while Putin may try and make this seem as legitimate as possible, this hasn't changed anything in Ukraine. Just today, even while this was happening, the Fifth Army was surrounded in Lyman. Officially, we now know who exactly is inside of Lyman and how bad of a situation it is for them. That didn't change because the Russians have now, in their minds, annexed the land. The Ukrainians are still pushing back across it in the northern areas, although it's supposed to be Russian land. This really hasn't changed anything. What do you think, Matthew?
To be honest with you, Enforcer, I was busy in the live chat.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. Matthew, I'm sorry about that, Matthew. Matthew is incredibly busy all the time with our live chat and trying to make sure that everything is going very smoothly. And I forget about that sometimes. I want him to comment on things, and he's like, because he wasn't even really listening to me. He was busy on his own stuff. But moving on from that, and sorry about that again, Matthew. This is clearly
It's all good.
It's fine. But it's clearly an illegal move. And the United Nations has made that clear. The world's made that clear. And absolutely nobody supports what the Russians have done. And the Ukrainians continue to get support to try and push back across this area and retake it from the Russians. How long will that take? Well, based off the speed they're going right now, most likely it will just take less than a year or maybe a couple of months. So hopefully soon. And we'll see Russian land being taken from the Russians as they conduct now what they'll be calling a heroic defense of the motherland. And so with that, we are moving on to our next bit of news from Moscow, and probably one of the most actually, there's a lot of news. That wasn't the first bit. For some reason, I thought it was going to be the last bit next. We actually had 3 more bits of news to cover. Starting off, once again, in the center of Moscow, we saw that they had a little bit of a celebration today to celebrate the annexation. And an interesting song choice. The song that they sing is We Need Only One Victory. Ironic in a way. Let me pull up the song for y'all. We need only one victory. And let me try and go and find y'all the lyrics for this. Or at least the story behind it. We need one victory. And I'm still not getting the Wikipedia page. I'm getting the Wikidata page, but not the Wikipedia page, which is what we're looking for. But anyways, to give you all a quick little synopsis of the song, this song was made talking about the Russians really just needing one victory to turn everything around. And that's the whole premise of the song. And you can see that's the whole song right here. That's the lyrics of it. If you like to pause, make sure to pause and take a look. But by and large, the song was made in the 70s, looking back at World War II and saying, and the song was really written about the time during the Battle of Moscow, the siege of Leningrad, and as the Germans were still marching on their way towards Stalingrad, and they were talking about, oh, we just need one victory and we can turn this whole war around. And that's real ironic because that's almost become the Russian standpoint now, is that they're losing everywhere. There's no winning side to this war that they can see. And now, of course, they're going with the coping mechanism of, we just need one victory, and we can even see them singing a song selection like that. And so, here's the video. Also, this guy kind of looks like a discount Johnny Depp. Anyways, let's...
Yes, he does.
Yeah, he does. Also, another quick thing. Let's look at this little picture here that we started off at. A lot of Russian flags and a very distinct-looking Russian stage. Huh, I feel like I've seen this before. Maybe in Sevastopol. Annexation of Crimea celebration. Let me see if Google Images has any pictures of this. When Putin went down there and all that. You know what I'm talking about? Let me see here. I'm trying to find the specific 2015 celebration. Oh man, for some reason Google always throws the stuff into oblivion. And I remember someone told us how we could avoid this, but unfortunately, I'm not really finding a way. Give me just a second, everyone. We're going to try and go on a little bit of a manhunt for this, because y'all will see the similarities in between this little celebration and the last one are striking. So, let's see, annexation 2015, I believe it was. We'll go to The Guardian. Maybe they have some pictures. Here it is. Here's a video of it. We're going to go to the video. We're going to mute it so that way we don't infringe on copyright. We're also going to get through the skippable ads. Thank God they're skippable. And let's look at this. Russian flags, of course, like we saw in the 2022 one. They shot off some fireworks at this one, so they did have a little bit of a, I guess you say, increased budget for this little production here. See them waving flags and cheering. And you see Putin coming out on stage. I believe this was actually in Sevastopol, if I'm correct. And wait a minute, no. This is in Moscow, in the exact same place. Russian flags all over. We can actually see some imperialist flags of the Russian Empire in there. And a very similar stage. And if you go to 2022, it's almost like the propaganda spin masters up at the very top who designed these little productions didn't really change much of anything. It looks very similar. In fact, it may be identical. And so with that, you know, I can kind of see that the Russians are desperately trying to put up propaganda coups, but if you just have a little bit of a longer-term memory, you'll see that these things are, by and large, run-of-the-mill. It's almost like they come out of a factory, just like the rest of the Russian military. Factory-made, low-quality garbage. With that, we're now going to be moving on into the next bit of news inside of Moscow, to the area of forget it. I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. I'm butchering it too much. Where we can see some Russians undergoing some training. And I'm just going to let this guy talk to you. Apparently he's a conscript with a poorly fitted helmet. In fact, all of them have poorly fitted helmets. And I'm just going to let him explain to y'all what the conscripts are thinking. And so here's the video.
Мы находимся на полигоне, учимся воевать. Нас обучают, как правильно стрелять, как правильно сражаться, встречать врага. Боевое братство проходим, как друг друга поддержать, сложной ситуации. Для чего готовимся? Ну, чтобы в первую очередь сохранить свои жизни.
And I know that we cannot get any kind of copyright trouble for this because there's something playing in the background as they're doing this interview. So just saying this is being used as fair use under, I believe, Title 11 of the U.S. Code. We're using this for news reporting purposes, and the music in the background is, of course, just normal, I guess you could say, day-to-day ambiance, so we can't get in trouble copyright-wise for this stuff. Just letting YouTube know, just in case if they come through and look at this.
And Enforcer, before you continue the video, look at how confident this guy is right here. He won't even face the camera and look it like directly in the eyes, basically.
Yeah.
He just keeps looking down at the ground.
And also, Matthew, I hope you noticed, but this helmet is so freaking small. It doesn't even cover his forehead. It's like on top of his head.
Oh man.
Oh man. And
I'm surprised they even have a helmet at all.
You know what this is? If we look at that helmet, once again, everyone, it's time to go on a helmet search. What's under that helmet cover, everyone? Well, if it was a 6B47 helmet, why do I know the name of that helmet? I don't know. But this is the 6B47 helmet. This is supposed to be standard issue in the Russian army. And if you look at this on someone's head or with a helmet cover on it, you can see it has a very distinct look. See, it has these pads that kind of extend from the side, and the helmet cover fits incredibly well. There's also this little space in the front for some kind of a mount. The mount, of course, you can put night vision goggles on it, flashlights, or a camera like a GoPro. This right here is clearly not a 6B47 helmet that's standard issue. What could that be? What could that be? It could not be the Shush 68 that was made in the Cold War and used by Soviet troops over the majority of that time period. It couldn't be. Let's actually put a helmet cover on that. And let's see if we can find the Ratnik one. And there we go. There's a Ratnik cover for a Shush helmet. Flip back over. Oh, buddy, we got a match. They're trying to make him look modern still. They're giving them the Ratnik camo cover, so I'll give them credit for at least trying to make these look like they may be well-equipped, but they're using a pressed steel helmet that was made in the 50s and the 60s. And so I don't really think this is going to provide a lot of protection to this man at all. But with that, we're going to let the video continue, and I'm going to let y'all talk to y'all about what the Russian conscripts are thinking.
Сохранить жизни товарищей и защитить Родину. Мы воюем против серьезного врага в лице Украины и Западной.
And I like how the narrative's now changed. Ukraine isn't just some backwards country that they're going to steamroll in 3 days to a week. Now they're a serious enemy. A serious enemy. They're not just an enemy anymore. They're actually putting up a freaking good fight.
Стран, которые окружили нас со всех сторон. Мы видели, что происходит вообще в мире. Практически, можно сказать, 50-70% мира ополчилось против России, против русского народа, который не дает свободно нам жить, существовать, иметь свою точку зрения.
What?
Живы, здоровы.
I know, what was that? I was waiting for this to end because some people complained that me pausing this and talking through it annoys them, so I was just waiting to get to the end and then go back. But what is this statement? Not letting us live freely, exist, have our own point of view. Who's stopping them? That's been the whole problem.
No, wait a minute. Putin said at the beginning they were going into Ukraine to, quote-unquote, denazify it. So why are they acting like the West is coming after them?
Well, because the Russians have to play the permanent victim to ever get anything done in life because their country is so backwards, it's so poorly maintained, it's so corrupt and incompetent that whenever they try and do anything, they fall flat on their faces. So there has to be a scapegoat, so that way the government doesn't always look like it's some kind of cartoony villain. And so they go and point out the West and say that the West is at fault for everything that happens in Russia. And that's why the war went from denazifying to Ukraine to now NATO's invading us and attacking us. The whole entire world's against us, and they're not wanting us to live freely, exist, and have our own point of view. And the whole problem...
Does it not raise a red flag to this guy that if 50 to 70% of the world is against you, that maybe you're in the wrong?
That's a great point, Matthew, and I don't think it really crosses their mind that if 50 to 70% of the whole world is against you, maybe they're not the ones in the right. Maybe they need to take a step back and go, maybe we've made a mistake. But that's not in the Russian vocabulary. You just blame everyone, threaten them with nukes, and keep on doing what you've been doing. And so with that, that's the end of that little... Well, actually, we're going to let the last second play out.
Свободно нам жить, существовать, иметь свою точку зрения, живы, здоровы, все с нами хорошо.
And I love how he says it like people in Russia are not expecting soldiers in training to be alive and healthy. He says it like he's a prisoner of war. We're alive and healthy. All is fine. That's what a prisoner of war says whenever they're put on film. And so, with that little nice ending right there, this wraps up this little segment of news about what the Russian conscripts are doing. None of their helmets fit. What in the world is this guy wearing? Like, that helmet isn't even on his head. Like, that thing's above his head. It's like an umbrella. But, yeah. Also, they don't have matching AKs. It looks like they're I guess you say, bulletproof rigs match. At least the covers on them. But then again, we all know what's under the bulletproof rigs. It's like some kind of flat piece of metal or an iPad.
I guarantee you, Enforcer, that fellow there on the far left, he has been drinking vodka for, like, all day. Look at that face.
He's schmacked. Like, that man, look at that mouth. That mouth right there is hardly keeping composure. He's about to start drooling and just fall forward and pass out for being too drunk. But with that, that's the end of this little video. And once again, giving y'all an idea of what's about to go into Ukraine. And I've got to tell y'all, it's nothing to be worried about whatsoever. These guys are not going to be posing too much of an issue. We're now going to be moving into our final bit of news from Russia. And it's a pretty interesting one. This is a video of Russian prisoner trucks. I guess you could say in the United States this would be called the Department of Corrections buses. In Russia, they use trucks that have no windows, and they're used to transport prisoners across Russia. These were spotted heading to an airport, and based off of how many of them there are, it's assumed that 1,000 inmates are inside of these trucks being sent to an airport to be loaded onto a IL-76 and flown off to either Ukraine or a training camp for a short amount of training.
Обратно в город едут синовские машины. Раз, два, три, четыре. Наверное, пацанов.
Wait a minute. What type of name for a federal bureau is that? The Federal Service for the Execution of Punishments.
The Execution of Punishments. That's a very interesting name.
They're already letting you know what's about to be happening in the Execution of Punishments Bureau.
Наших с лагерей увезли на бойню. Ну, кому что.
And there they are at the airport, no lie, in front of a Russian Air Force IL-76. Can anyone believe this or not? They're actually sending prisoners to Ukraine. Thousands of them, apparently. At least 1,000 of them here, and who knows how many others. I can't believe it, honestly. That's insane to think that there's going to be actual prisoners, criminals, in the Russian army fighting Ukraine. I bet they will be some of the worst fighting forces that the Russians have ever raised. They'll probably have massive disciplinary issues, massive cohesion issues, among many other things. These are certainly not going to be making much of an impact on the front line either. And so with that, we have now covered all of our Russian news, and we're going to be heading back to Ukraine to cover our location unknowns and start moving down the northeastern area of the front line. But before we get there and cover that news, we're going to take a quick pause to address 3 questions from the chat, and after we answer those 3 questions and our polls, we'll be moving on into the next segment. And so take it away, Matthew. I forgot that part.
All right. There we go. All right, folks. So for our first question segment of the night, we do have about 3 polls to address. And the first one was actually created by the Enforcer. And it said, should Ukraine be allowed to join NATO? It looks like 81% said yes, 13% said maybe, it's a double-edged sword, and 6% said no. Now for me on this one, I'd have to say the timing is a big factor for me. And this kind of, I don't want to take away the thunder from the second poll that I put up, but I think that if they were to join NATO right now while the war is ongoing, that might provoke Russia to tip them over the point to do something horrific. But that's my take on it. So Enforcer, what is your take?
I would have to say it would be nice for Ukraine to join NATO, and it is something that should happen. However, I would have to agree with Matthew that the timing is incredibly important. And with Ukraine joining NATO right now, they could start throwing in a myriad of issues. For example, if they are still involved in this war and then join NATO in the middle of this, does that start to breach Article 5 if their forces are targeted by Russian artillery and bombarded? Would that start to invoke Article 5 for the rest of NATO? And would that plunge the entire world into a world war, which the West has been so carefully trying to avoid over these past few months? That is a major question to ask. And so I would say yes. I would have to be with the overwhelming majority of y'all, but I do think that we should give it a little bit more time, try and see if we can have this war end, and then fast track Ukraine into NATO so fast that it'll be record breaking as far as a country joining NATO and the amount of time it took. And so with that, I hope that addresses the poll fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And Enforcer, I've been seeing a lot of people say this in the live chat, but I don't know if it's true, so we might want to look it up. I see many people saying that you can't join NATO in the midst of a conflict.
Can you join NATO while in war? Let's see here. According to the study, countries seeking NATO membership would have to be able to demonstrate that they fulfilled certain requirements. What requirements are these, pray tell? Let's see here. Open door, any decision, let's see. Consensus among all allies. No third country has a say in such deliberations. Let's see here. Let's see here. Let's see here. I can't find anything specifically here about Article 10 and enlargement saying anything about that. Let's go to the open door statement here, and let's see about that. I can't read anything like that in here either. What are the conditions for joining NATO? A functioning democratic political system based on a market economy, the fair treatment of minority populations. It looks like Serbia would never be able to join. A commitment to the peaceful resolution of conflicts, the ability and willingness to make a military contribution to NATO operations. Wait a minute. That just answered something right there for us real quick from last night when someone said that you don't pay dues to NATO. And right here it says, on the NATO website, the ability and willingness to make a military contribution to NATO operations, which I would assume also means paying some kind of a due. And then it says something else. This is, once again, under the Article 10, but sadly I didn't see anything in there specifically about not going to war.
But honestly, Enforcer, on that one, even if there is something saying that they can't join during a conflict, the truth of the matter is if they vote them into NATO and allow them in, then they're in. So it would make it meaningless.
And that's true. That's also another important thing to remember about treaties and doctrines is that they only mean something if the people in charge think it means something. And so while that may be on paper, everyone may just decide, who cares? And then just go against it and do something anyways. And so with that, also, we won't give historical precedent for that. There is historical precedent out there, but I won't bring it up because I feel like it's a little bit of a, I guess you could say, a more sensitive topic. But still, with that, we are on to the next poll.
All right, and the next poll said, if Ukraine were allowed to join NATO, would that spark severe consequences by Russia? And I put in parentheses, a nuclear war. It looks like 53% said, not really, but maybe. 29% said no, it would not cause consequences, and 18% said yes, it would cause nuclear war. So it looks like most of you are in the middle on this one, and it seems like more people than not say it would not cause consequences. So I would have to fall within the 18% that said yes, but I will give a caveat about the nuclear war part. It may cause them to either do something with nuclear weapons or fully mobilize their military. But personally, I think it would cause them to do something drastic. But Enforcer, do you want to go back over that one?
Yes. I feel that if Ukraine did join NATO, of course, timing does matter. We've already mentioned that. If they joined it now, and Article 5 was invoked because of the ongoing war, and then the rest of the world, pretty much, the rest of the Western world, entered the war, nuclear war would be an inevitable certainty. Reason being is that the Russian conventional army could not stand against the Western army. We can see that they can't even stand against a quasi-Western army like Ukraine's that has hardly had time to, I guess you could say, familiarize itself with Western doctrine over the past few years, has a small, I guess you could say a moderate sprinkling of Western weaponry amongst their ranks, and they are currently slaughtering the Russian military. Think about that, but against a country like the United Kingdom or the United States and any other Western country that literally their entire military practice is founded in the use of Western doctrine and advanced Western weaponry. And think about a country as refined as that militarily going up against the Russians. It wouldn't even be a fair fight like we can see with the Ukrainians and the Russians right now. And so going off of that, the Russians would have to go to desperate measures to try and stop this war. They would threaten nuclear weapons. At that point, there would most likely be, actually believe it or not, I believe before we even got to nuclear weapons, there would be some kind of a diplomatic negotiation by the Russians and the United States to try and see if there can be some kind of agreement made before everything goes into nuclear oblivion. But then there's a huge question of whether any kind of agreement would be made or not, or if the talks would stall. And if the talks stalled, the Russians would most likely immediately go into using nuclear weapons. And so in the end, nuclear war would be an assured certainty, especially if we go into a conventional war. With Ukraine and that in mind, I would have to say that if it's during the current war and Ukraine join NATO, yes, nuclear war would happen. If they join after the war, nuclear war probably wouldn't happen. In fact, I don't believe it would ever happen. And so with that, I hope that addresses that poll fairly well. And we are now on to, I think, the next one, if we have one.
And yes, we do have one more poll, and this one said, should Ukraine starve the Russian soldiers out or aggressively push them out? It looks like 60% voted for the starve them out option, and 40% said fight or push them out. Personally, I think starving them out is a better way to go. Because they don't necessarily have to put in a ton of manpower to push them out, which takes a lot more energy. But Enforcer, what would you say?
I would have to say that starving them out would be the best alternative. We've already seen how actual, I guess you could say, street-to-street urban fighting goes for the Russians in Mariupol and also Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. And I would have to say that both of those instances, although the Russian army is, of course, backwards to, high heaven, I would have to say that if the Ukrainians tried to conduct something similar, it would probably be a little less bloody, but still far bloodier than one would hope. Starving them out is a lot better option. It's protracted. You don't have to actually actively put soldiers into dangerous situations to try and clear the town, and the Russians would eventually just run out of food and supplies, and then they would have no choice but to surrender, or else they just sit there and starve to death. And so I would have to go with the 60% of y'all that said starve them out, because starving them out is the preferable option. It saves Ukrainian lives. And so with that, I hope that addresses that poll fairly well. A little bit of a short one, but still hopefully effective. And with that, we are finally on to the live chat questions. And with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, folks. So first up from our super chat questions, I want to say that I don't know who started it tonight, but for some reason, everybody's saying it's my birthday in the live chat. It's nowhere near my birthday, but thank you very much for the kind sentiment. I'm not sure who started it, but it looks like it's gained some traction in the chat. And also our first super chat, which is from Mark, the ex-orc sanguinator, who puts in a very generous $170 donation. Says, Andrew, can you wish Matt a very happy Enforcer birthday? A small singing wish will get a bonus. And I know Matt said it's not his birthday, but I'm evil.
Well, thank you so much, Mark, for the support, the massive amount of support again. Mark, you ain't really, honestly, I was just thinking about this. This is like the 4th or the 5th day in a row that you supported our channel like that. And so with that, since you have supported this channel so much, we are going to suspend reality for a second and say that it is Matthew's birthday and he's now turning 23, I think. Wouldn't you be turning 23?
Yes.
Okay, so now he's turning 23. From now until the end of time, he's now 23 years old. And so a small singing wish will get a bonus. Hopefully everyone can bear this, but I'm not going to sing it. I'm not going to sing it. I'm not going to stoop that low, but I will at least say it out to him. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Matthew. Happy birthday to you. And so with that, I hope that dang. But with that, I should have done that in the Sam Elliott voice. That would have probably been the best way to do that. But thank you so much once again for the support, Mark. Of course, it helps us out a massive deal. And it's good to know that you know it's not his birthday. But I don't think a lot of people know that. So with that, also, Adam Pullman just said, how does the enforcer not know Matt's age? Listen, Matthew doesn't know my age either. It takes both of us a minute to sit there and say, how old are you? Like, then we start counting out on our fingers. We're like, 20? Yeah, and then we're like, yeah, I'm 20 or something like that. That's just how we are. But with that, I thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address the comment, Mark. And thank you so much once again for helping out this channel and helping us to keep this thing on running. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again.
And yes, thank you very much, Mark, for that. And up next, we have a $100 super chat from Mike G, who says, if Belarus sends troops across the border, should the U.S. and NATO put boots on the ground to even the score? I personally say yes.
And who sent that in again? Because I got to go.
Mike G.
Mike G, a real G. There we go. I just found it. I got to make sure to read this one out because Belarus sends troops to put boots on the ground to even the score. I say yes. If Belarus joined the war, I don't think we could. And I know that that's not a great answer, but hear me out on this one. I don't think we could do that reasonably. Once again, just because Belarus joins the war, it doesn't really change the standing of Ukraine. Also, it wouldn't be too much of a major issue, I guess you could say, considering that only about 20 to 30,000 Belarusian troops could get involved in this war based off of the calculations we did months ago. It wouldn't make that big of a difference. And I would have to say that it doesn't really change the stance. Belarus, once again, is not attacking a NATO country, and so we couldn't throw in Western troops, American troops, or British, or anyone's troops for that matter, without getting directly involved in the war and then fighting the Russians outright, which would then turn this into an all-out world war. And so, with that in mind, I would have to say, sadly, I don't think that would be possible. I do love the sentiments, though, and I would heavily agree with that statement. If there weren't nuclear arms involved in that the Russian army was so incompetent, because that's actually a double-edged sword in a way when you look at it. If the Russian army was modern and competent, nuclear war probably wouldn't happen for quite some while. It would give a long enough time for negotiations and peace talks, at least, in probably about a year or two span before we got to the point where nuclear arms would probably be used. However, considering that the Russians and the Belarusians are so backwards militarily, it would be a one-sided war. It would end almost as quickly as it began, and then that would put such a desperate state on the Russians that they would have to use nuclear weapons at that point, almost probably within weeks of the war starting. And so, with that in mind, I would have to say no, but I do like the idea, and I would support it if it wasn't for the fact that the Russians would probably start flinging nukes because they got a psycho in charge. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, and thank you so much once again for the support, Mike G. And also, thank you for being Old Guard live chat member, an Old Guard Lee Spring Army member as well. You've been around for quite some while, and I thank you so much for enjoying this channel and watching us for this long. And so with that, we are now on to the final question of this segment, and then we are on into the next segment of news. And so, what is the last question?
All right, and the last one for this segment goes once again to Mark the ex-Orc Sanguinator, who puts in a $75 donation this time, and says, close enough to singing, here's the bonus.
And I thank you for the support, Mark. And actually, I didn't know that that you meant a bonus like that. I actually was just thinking like bonus points, you know, like whenever you joke, well, I won't throw out that joke, but whenever you're just joking about, hey, if I did that, how many bonus points would I get? I thought you meant that. I didn't know you meant a real bonus. But with that, I thank you so much for the support and, of course, helping out this channel. That's incredibly generous of you to do, just for me to literally read off happy birthday like it's some kind of a robot reading off a text line. Like, if y'all have ever watched those channels, there's a lot of them that do Ukraine war stuff. The Russian army is now moving towards Lyman. Lyman is a city of 50,000 people. And somewhere in the flat hills of Ukraine. Like, that's like one of those voices, and I read it off like that. You still supported our channel, and so thank you so much once again for the support, Mark. And I hope that you enjoyed it. Although it wasn't singing, it was kind of close. And so with that, we are now out of this question segment, and we're going to be moving on into our next segment of news, starting off with the location unknowns. And I had to really quick, Matthew, scroll up and look at one of the bots you took up. It's like, oh, what did he say? But anyways, starting off with our first location unknown, and we have very little of them today. In fact, today is a record-setting day for the amount of location unknowns we have. We only have 3 of them. So starting off on the first one, we saw a Buke get turned into puke as the Ukrainians hit it with some artillery and blew the thing up. We can see what's practically a virgin field in Ukraine, as there's almost no pot marks in it, which is incredibly rare. And we see the artillery just hit the Buke dead on. One of the missiles went flying across the field, creating this beautiful little white streak. It looks like it's going on an adventure of its own. It's trying to return back to Russia itself. And the Buke is now, suffice it to say, disassembled. Winnebago Nutshot just said, I wonder if the Enforcer has aspirations of doing a spoken word duet with William Shatner. Do I have vocation like William Shatner? I wonder. Hopefully not. Someone just said it looks fake. I assure you, this is quite real. Now you can see the black smoke of death finally coming from the Buke after the propellant is burned off. And that lets us know that another $15 million anti-air vehicle has just been knocked out in a matter of seconds. And that's the end of the video, and it's nice to see that the Ukrainians are still knocking out anti-air systems by using a flying drone that probably has a radar signature to find them and destroy them. With that, we're now going to be moving on to our next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see Ukrainian BMP firing off its cannon. And so, here's the video. Oh, wait a minute, hang on. Was this guy using an iPad? Yeah, he's using an iPad with a little leather cover. It's like he came out of an office or something. We see it fire off the round. Once again, that very distinct little ringing noise that comes from the recoilless guns.
Ебать, світлячок. Це з колпачком полетів, блядь.
А вони без колпачка треба горять.
Жди. Бля, з колпачком полетів, да? Чи ні? Ні?
Вони всі так горять.
Да?
Да, вони всі так горять.
Я їбу, блядь.
We hear them just having a little conversation as they continue to load and operate the BMP.
Туда же? Принял. Да, 4. Давай!
Goodness. Man, they can fire off that BMP gun rather quickly. I don't know about that, though. The sight of that was a little bit scary. Watch this, Sandy. When they fired the gun, a little bit, I guess you could say, of some sparks or some heated objects come out of the breach a little bit too quickly. I don't know about that.
You're saying the sparks aren't supposed to be coming out?
I would assume not. Usually a breach is supposed to be completely sealed. You know that, but you know, I could be wrong. Maybe the recoilless guns, the 73mm guns that the BMP use, maybe a little bit of that goes back through the breach, but I don't think it's supposed to. Someone in the chat that actually knows about that, let me know if you have any experience with 73mm recoilless guns that BMP1s use. I would like to know that. Because I don't think that's normal, but it may be. I'm not entirely sure. And so that's the end of the video. But it's nice to see that the Ukrainians are using a BMP-1 like a small SPG. Finally, on to the last bit of Location Unknown news. We saw a bit of a chain explosion. If you've been busy, Matthew, this is not the video that you need to watch. It's actually another one. And so here's the video of the Ukrainians dropping a bomblet onto a Russian camp. It goes through the tarp. It then explodes. The chain reaction, I believe, is about to begin. Now we see a Russian climbing out. now we see another one climbing out. And we're about to go through a clown car, aren't we? Wait a minute, no. No, we found it. This is the chain reaction. You're going to love this, Matthew. You might want to watch. They dropped the bomblet and... Whoa!
Whoa!
Oh my god!
What kind of bomblet was that? A mini nuke?
Actually, here's what happened. That little bomblet dropped on some ammunition that was literally just on the side of the road. Like, that's how the Russians are storing ammunition these days, is that you just pile it up on the side of the road. And
They used to call those IEDs back in the day.
Yeah. And also, another thing, the explosion was so strong, you can actually see the drone shaking in air. Ooh! Oh, my lord. Now see the drone lifting up and looking at the massive mushroom cloud that's forming right alongside it. And that was an explosion and a half. And with that, that's the end of the video. And I gotta say, that wasn't a smart move by the Russians to put all the ammunition in one place on the side of the road. With that, we're finally out of the location unknowns, and we're going to be moving on into the northeastern Kharkiv area. Starting off with a continuation of the Ukrainian Su-24 that was shot down yesterday, this time seen in a different angle, and we finally got a location for it in the northern Kharkiv area. And so, here's the video. When you see the Su-24 going down, the pilots, of course, ejecting, as you saw there. And the Su-24, of course, slammed down into the field and exploded. The pilots, you can see right over there. Both of their parachutes deployed. Both of the pilots are alive, thank goodness. With that, we're now going to be moving on into our next bit of news. Further down the line, towards the area of Vrochina, I believe, where we can see Ukrainians using a javelin against a tank. Haven't seen Saint Javelin out in a while, and it's good to see that they're still out there, and they're still operating. And also they got the music blaring. Javelin fires, it goes flying down the street, right towards a Russian tank. Wabooey, it's out. It's quick and easy, rather simple. And so that's the end of that video, and nice to see the Ukrainians are still knocking out Russian tanks. Moving on into our next clip, in the Kupiansk area, we saw Ukrainian forces moving eastwards from the city. As far as we know, this is a few days old, like the caption says, but it is showing that there may be some ground that we have not been able to account for on our streams yet. See them walking down the highway. There has been a bit of a destruction in the city, but largely Kupiansk was taken earlier in the war, hardly without a fight. The Ukrainian forces retreated from the town, and the Russians took it mostly intact. But we can see that apparently the recent fighting has caused perhaps some damage to the town, or this may have been the very light amount of damage that was caused at the start.
Уже разбули, да? Когда будем разбивать? Хотел походу педали забрать.
See a whole load of mines that the Russians have laid out, quite obviously, across the street. The Russians really never put effort into hiding those things.
I'm assuming the Russians are nowhere around for them to be walking down the middle of the road like that.
Oh yeah, the Russians are nowhere around, and that gives us a pretty good idea that they may have been withdrawing from this area when this video was made a few days ago. And so with that, we're now going to be moving further on down the line and into the area of Kupiansk-Vzlovye, where we saw the 30th Brigade hit an ammunition depot today, knocking it out of action. Credit goes to the 30th Mechanized, and so here's the video. We can see a small fire start to grow. Small puff of smoke. That was a little quick.
Just a small puff.
Just a small puff. And Alakazam, 30 Russians just did a disappearing act, along with dozens of tons of ammo. So with that, that's the end of the video, and once again, credit to the 30th Mechanized Brigade for helping the Russians to become magicians. Whoever thought that the Russians would be so good at disappearing acts? Moving on into the next bit of news, near Kivs-Sharivka, we saw that the Kraken unit also took a crack at the Russians. Hope you all saw what I did there, eh? And so here's the video. We see some Russian forces right here. Oh, goodness! Oh my lord, I don't even know what that hit on that tank. But what a magnificent explosion. Gotta say, I like it. I like it. Another Russian tank knocked out, most likely. White smoke billowing off of it. It's kind of odd. I wonder if that artillery shell hit right on the smoke grenade dischargers, and that's what we saw was a mix of the artillery shell exploding and the smoke grenades also blowing up as well. I don't really know. And it looks like the tank hasn't moved, so I'm assuming that it was knocked out. And so with that, that's the end of the video, and it's nice to see that the Kraken unit has also taken...
So wait, Enforcer, was that... I'm seeing people in the live chat say it was white phosphorus. Was that true?
I'm not entirely sure. It wouldn't make a lot of sense for the Ukrainians to hit the tank with white phosphorus. There was a decent amount of, I guess you could say, dark explosive matter in there. You can see it. So I'll show that again. Boom. It hits. Decent amount of, I guess you could say, normal artillery explosion is seen. But there's also a decent amount of, I guess you could say, white smoke as well. It may have been a white phosphorus shell. I would be willing to say that it may have been a white phosphorus shell, but how odd would that be for the Ukrainians to be hitting these tanks with high explosive shells throughout the entirety of the war, and then hit this one with a white phosphorus shell? That would be kind of weird. But I think, honestly, in my opinion, I'd still have to stick with the more logical explanation that that was a normal artillery shell that hit the tank and somehow directly hit or exploded right near the smoke grenade launchers, and then those blew up, and that's the smoke that we're seeing. And so with that, that's the end of the video, and we're now going to be moving out of the northern Kharkiv area and on down into our final segment of news, starting off in the Bilo-Orivka area and making our way down the remainder of the front lines, Crimea, and moving on up to Kyiv to cover the news that Zelensky's done today, which pertains directly about NATO, and then President Zelensky's speech. But before we get to all of that news, it's time for us to take another quick pause and address a couple of questions from the live chat and also our polls as well. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right. So for our second to last question segment of the stream, we only have one poll to address, and the question was, do you think that NATO members can disregard regulations to allow Ukraine membership? It looks like 44% said no, NATO are bound to regulations. 31% said yes, the regulations are irrelevant, and 24% said I don't know. Now for me, basically it comes down to what the most powerful members of NATO decide, and they kind of get to push around the other members is the way I think it really works. Some people are going to disagree with that. But I think they can basically change the rules at will, because who's going to risk making the larger members mad by saying, no, we don't like that, we don't want to let Ukraine in? I don't think they would do that. But Enforcer, what do you think?
I would have to say, in my opinion, I think that NATO regulations can kind of be overlooked. Let's go and see if there's any historical precedent for that. Times that NATO regulations were broken. When was the last time? What challenges? When did Russia suspend? Let's see. What did NATO do in the 50s? Let's see here. Has Russia been a NATO member? Can Russia be expelled from the United Nations? Let's see. Is Russia in NATO 2021?
Oh, no. Who asked that question?
I don't know, but apparently that's a commonly asked question, which is kind of a little concerning. But moving on from that, I can't find any historical precedent for it. And so going off a historical precedent, I would have to say that NATO is bound to regulations regardless. But at the same time, in light of the current events, it could be agreed upon amongst all allied members that they will overlook certain things and do whatever they wish. That's always something that happens. If you've ever been in the American judicial system, you'll see that happen commonly. U.S. laws don't really mean much in a courtroom, believe it or not. And and I bet you this, Matthew, here comes someone who has never had any dealings with the U.S. legal system. They're going to say, actually, judges follow the law every time.
Oh, no, they definitely don't.
They definitely do
and
not.
laws only mean something if people actually follow the law. For example, if NATO has regulations and all the members decide, who cares about the regulations? Well, they mean nothing anymore. They're just irrelevant. That's basically the way it works. It's kind of, a little bit, I guess, irritating that regulations really don't mean anything. But, I mean, who's going to come in and say you can't do that if all the members decide to observe the rules?
And that is a great point. And I think that's something that always has to be kept in consideration, is that while the rules say one thing, people could just do another. A lot of y'all may know that there are speed limits on the road, yet almost everyone I know, including myself, almost always drives 10 miles per hour over the speed limit. It's a law. You would think people would follow it, but really no one doesn't. And so with that, I hope that kind of addresses that poll fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and that was our only poll for the moment. So we're now moving on to our super chat questions, and just trying to reorganize the spreadsheet real quick. There we go. So up next, or up first actually, we have a $80 super chat from Beef Taco, who says Russia annexes Ukrainian land in 4 oblasts, and Ukraine tries to fast-track NATO membership. What does the enforcer see as the short and long-term implications?
I see that the Russian annexation, also thank you so much for the massive support, and I'll cover that in a second. I see that the Russian annexation really doesn't have any long-term effects. The Russians may try and insist that that is their land, but if they get no international backing on that statement, they will face international condemnation if they make decisions based off of that idea. So it may as well be pointless. That's what I see so far in that direction. With the Ukraine trying to fast-track their way into NATO, I honestly do not see that happening right now, considering that the West has been walking this fine line in between supporting Ukraine and getting and staying out of war. And so I think that they will probably not allow Ukraine to join NATO as of this moment, but after the war, they will most likely enter NATO practically immediately. So with that, I hope that addresses that fairly well, at least in the long term. I don't think after this war, the Russians will really have a lot to do or say in protest about Ukraine joining NATO. That will just be the way things go at that point. And whether the Russians can actually get a handle on things or make some kind of diplomatic protest would almost be out of the question, considering they won't be taken seriously once this war is over by really any international body. And so with that, I hope that addresses the comment in all ways. And of course, thank you so much for the massive amount of support, helping this channel to keep running, because without viewers like y'all, it's not possible to run these streams nightly. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again.
All right, and Enforcer, I saw one comment from the live chat that I want to read off. It's from Alphabet Soup, who says, it's weird that they have that kind of perspective on law and order, yet are upset about what Russia is doing. Really disappointed, guys. Well, Alphabet Soup, I think you misunderstood what we were saying. I'm not necessarily saying I support usurping regulations at will, but that's the way it actually works in real life. Whether or not we like it or not, it's another story. But that's just simply the way it works. And Enforcer, do you want to add anything to it?
Yes. I don't really understand. I have to say this because this is something that I always try and say. I try and say that I'm understanding about a lot of standpoints. I don't know why you're really disappointed about someone else's opinion. Opinions are just opinions at the end of the day. Everyone has a different one. Sorry that mine doesn't really align with yours, but in real life, the rules only really mean something if people agree to follow them. It's the premise of a social contract. And if everyone just decides one day to wake up and go, I don't really like that social contract anymore, let's just change it, it will change on a dime. Like, for example, the U.S. invasion of Iraq, just to go back in time a little bit, was that really legal? Probably not. When you really look at it, we went in there with the premise of getting Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction out of Iraqi hands. Did we find weapons of mass destruction? No, we actually found out that the people that we sent to Iraq to go find the yellow cake uranium had lied and they had never seen it. So that invasion, on the surface, seems illegal. But the entire world agreed at the same time, pretty much, except for a very small minority of countries, which really didn't matter, that it was a good thing to do. And so the social contract was changed. It wasn't really looked at as a legal evasion. Nowadays, it kind of is, depending on who you talk to, but it's still considered a normal invasion. And in the end, it didn't really turn out too bad. There was a little bit of a schism that occurred in the Middle East, of course, with ISIS, but afterwards, things have seemed to stabilize, except for Syria, which is still having some issues because of the Arab Spring, which I guess you could say was kind of indirectly caused by U.S. intervention in the Middle East, and everything had been boiling over there culturally for a while. But with that, I hope that addresses that comment, because it is what it is. People can change things on a dime. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and I hope I addressed that fairly well.
All right. So moving on to our next super chat, we have a $75 donation once again from Mark, the ex-or sanguinator. And Mark, thank you very much for the very generous support. You're being extremely generous, and we really do appreciate it. Mark says, "Happy birthday, Andrew. If Matt sings happy birthday, a bonus will follow. May as well be an equal opportunity Havoc creator. Sorry, over my limit at prior gift." So I guess it's Andrew's birthday now.
Apparently so. Now I'm 21. Now I can go and get cigarettes. And so, Matthew, do you want to sing happy birthday to me?
This could be horrific.
It probably will be. I don't mean to put you down, but it probably will be.
But happy birthday. Happy birthday, Enforcer. Good old Enforcer.
Was that even a song, or was that more like a haiku?
It was spoken word. It was haiku. Yes, it was a haiku. Yes, indeed.
Oh man. But once again, Mark, I thank you so much for the support.
And Mark, please do not send in a bonus. You're being very generous, and we appreciate it. But please, thank you very much. But just thank you very much for the support you put in already.
Yes, thank you for the support, Mark. I do not want to, I do not want you to send in another amount of support. If you do, we can't stop you. Of course, it's not like we can physically stop you. But at this point, you put in so much support tonight, I'm questioning whether it's okay or not to even accept more support from you. But thank you so much once again for all the support you've given out to us tonight and over the past few nights. It's been massive. It helps us out greatly, and it helps this channel to keep on rolling. I say that a million times. I say that again tonight, but it really does. And I got to thank you so much for helping this channel to keep on running, and for the funny joke that you keep on doing tonight and throwing in bonuses, just non-stop bonuses, which is really odd, and they're massive, and they help us out a great deal. And so thank you so much once again for the support, Mark, the Orc ex-sanguinator, and I hope that addresses that one fairly well. And so with that, we are going to be moving on into, I believe, the last one of the segment, and then we're going to be moving on into the final bit of news.
All right, so the last one of this segment goes to Steve LaPlante, who puts in a $70 donation and says, "It's time to celebrate Lyman liberation. When do you guys think Russia will be declared a terrorist state? And what would be a NATO response to a nuke tactical strike?" Now, Steve, thank you very much for the support. But one thing I have wondered when I see people advocating to declare Russia a terrorist state is, rather than just simply being symbolic and denouncing Russia, legislatively, what does that actually accomplish? I don't know.
It doesn't accomplish anything legislatively, but it does accomplish something diplomatically. It ensures that we diplomatically will almost always have an unfriendly or hostile stance towards them in the future, and treat any of their intentions as trying to stir some kind of problems, cause some kind of trouble, or destabilize the world. And so it's more of, I guess you could say in that regard, it's still more of a symbolic nature, because even if we do label them a terrorist state, who's to say that in 20 years' time, the prevailing winds change politically in the United States, and even with that still standing over them, we start treating them like a friendly nation. You know, that's something that could happen. But in that regard, and I'm saying in that regard a lot tonight. Sorry about that, everyone. But in that regard, I would have to say, can you reread it again real quick? Because I think it was multi-part. And so if you could just read off And if you could just read off that first part for me, because it's hard for me to remember all of them and still try and get out answers.
So the first part was, should Russia be declared a terrorist state? And the second part was, what would a NATO response look like to a nuke tactical strike?
So the first one, I would say that Russia should be labeled a terrorist state. Is the United States going to do that? No. Apparently, just to talk really quickly, because I don't, and you know, of course, we keep politics out of this channel completely. We do not talk about modern U.S. politics in any way, and we don't touch on political issues. However, I feel like this one thing can be said by everyone with absolute certainty. And there was a dumb decision by the current administration to not label Russia as a terrorist state. It made absolutely no sense to say they were not going to do that and to come out and make such a clear statement on it. They are obviously a terrorist state, especially in the form that they've taken now. And this would be like saying in the 40s that Nazi Germany is not a terrorist state. It doesn't make any sense, and I think everyone can agree that that was a bad call. Not getting into the rest of American politics and saying that that reflects on the rest of the policies of the current administration, whether they are positive or negative. I'm saying that on that particular issue, that made no sense whatsoever, and they should have been declared a terrorist state at that moment. Moving on from that and discussing the second part, can we get that second part again?
What do you think a NATO response would look like to a nuclear tactical strike?
The Western world will most likely respond to a tactical nuclear strike by, I would say this, because it's not going to be immediate. It's not like there's a little switch where they say, oh, a tactical nuclear weapon has landed and exploded in Ukraine, flick, and then Western forces just roll across the border. There will most likely be threats for probably several days at that point. And
honestly, Enforcer, here's what I think, and it's going to be an unpopular opinion, but this is what I think. If NATO were trying to respond to a nuclear tactical strike, I don't think that they would do anything, to be totally honest. I think they would simply issue a denunciation of it, and they wouldn't actually do anything.
And that's something I'm kind of scared of, but at the same time, you've got to
think... They should, though.
You got to think that Western leaders would think, what kind of message is that going to show about Western resolve? Specifically, in the United States, what kind of resolve does that show? Because if y'all don't know anything, there is no actual scale that shows the resolve and the power and the might of a country. All of this is just inside of our heads. It doesn't really exist anywhere rather than in our, I guess you could say, inside of our minds. And so if the United States didn't respond seriously to something like that, even when we've set out threats and ultimatums against it, what does that make the United States look like? Can anything that the United States has done or said be taken seriously at that point? Would that embolden the Chinese to invade Taiwan because they would see that the United States is a pushover? What would that do? And I think that's something that would have to be run through the government's head all the time. They wouldn't be able to sleep, because that would have to be the major question. Would that make the United States look so weak that our entire sphere of influence collapses for that one reason alone? Or could we somehow power through it? And I feel like we wouldn't be able to. I feel like that would show such a weakness on the US's part that everyone would start to do whatever they wanted to, because our threats would be hollow. At least that one would have been hollow at that point, and that would embolden other people to do things that they wouldn't have otherwise done. And so
Enforcer, what do you think NATO should do in response to a nuke being launched?
I think if tactical nuclear weapons are dropped inside of Ukraine, the United States and the rest of NATO ought to directly threaten that if the war does not cease within a certain amount of time, like a week, which would be a realistic timetable, U.S. and NATO forces would begin to enter Ukraine in support of Ukrainian armed forces and the Ukrainian government. I feel like that would be about the best thing to do, because that doesn't immediately throw us into a third world war. That gives at least a week span of time. That also gives the military to prepare, I guess you could say, attacks, much like we did with Iraq. You know, if you ever remember George Bush with, I'm giving Saddam Hussein 24 hours to leave Baghdad. And then we conducted, I guess you could say, the precise bombings of Iraqi infrastructure that after those 24 hours. That 7 days would also give us a similar amount of time. In fact, 7 days is, when you think about it, that's actually too long, because that also gives the Russians time to prepare their response. We may want to do another 24-hour window like we did with Iraq, and already be creating contingency plans just in case if our ultimatum was not adhered to within that 24-hour timetable. So now to refine the statement, so that way I can get out clearly what I would do as president if tactical nuclear weapons were used inside of Ukraine. I would give an ultimatum that a ceasefire will have to be declared within the next 24 hours, and diplomatic negotiations will have to begin immediately in between the two parties, or the United States will directly intervene in the war in the support of the Ukrainian government and armed forces. That would be my ultimatum. And in that meantime, up till that point, because tactical nuclear weapons haven't been dropped, I would be encouraging the Air Force, as well as the Navy, and also the Army, although the Army would be, I guess you could say, the most reactionary force of the three. It wouldn't be a proactive force. The Air Force and the Navy would have to come up with contingency plans, just in case if the ultimatums were not made, were not adhered to immediately begin bombing campaigns of Russian infrastructure to start knocking them out as quickly as possible. And so with that, I hope
Enforcer, here's what I think about it. I think that it should be a precedent that nobody uses nuclear weapons in a tactical manner from this point forward or ever. I think that the United States and NATO ought to draw a red line on that if a tactical nuke were used in Ukraine, even though that doesn't necessarily affect a NATO country, that we would respond with nuclear weapons ourselves as a deterrent. Because if it becomes the precedent that nuclear weapons are used in a tactical manner, that would be absolutely horrific for warfare, and I don't think that should be allowed to happen.
I don't think it should be allowed to happen either, and that's why I would have to say that if tactical nuclear weapons were used in this war, the Western response would have to be swift. Either we can't,
and very strong.
We cannot live in a world where that starts to become a reality. Is that when a larger nuclear power goes to war, tactical nuclear weapons are on the table. That should never be a reality. And if that means that the entire world, the entire modern world has to cease to end to ensure that just doesn't become the reality we live in, I think that is a decent exchange, in my opinion. Of course, you can disagree, but I feel like that's about where I stand on that topic. And so with that, I hope that does address the question fairly well. And I also saw someone say no nukes ever. And then that's a great point. It's terrible to use nukes, but I think nukes will never be removed from the world, and so you always have to view the things in the world as the Russians are more than apt to threaten to use nukes and may also use them. And so what will we do in response to that? And it has to be of equal force, unfortunately. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well. And I think that was the last one of this segment, wasn't it, Matthew?
And it was.
And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope I addressed that comment fairly well. And with that, we're going to be moving on into our final segment of news. And also, believe it or not, Matthew, the news is running rather late tonight. We've had some incredibly long question segments. And so,
yes, we have.
And so with that in mind, we're actually going to be trying to get through the rest of this news rather quickly. I'm going to summarize this entire area and just show you all the clips. Everywhere from Orivka down to Kherson has had no frontline changes today, and so just keep that in mind as we move through this news. Starting off in the Orivka area, we did see that the Foreign Legion was advancing through the countryside roads, I guess you could say. We don't know what kind of progress they've made, but they have made progress.
Woo! Yeah! Russian tank towing a Russian tank!
Go fuck yourself. Whoever gave us that tank. Yeah. Go over there.
Yeah, go over there. Over there.
Are these British or Americans?
These are British foreign volunteers.
Oh, my phone!
Why am I doing a helmet voice?
Yo!
It's not even a tank, it's a recovery vehicle!
It's a BMP!
Oh yeah, there's Americans and Brits inside of this truck.
BMP! It's a recovery vehicle!
That's a hell of a mixture.
No, you need to turn left.
Yeah, fuck these roads, bro.
Turn left when? Here, somewhere.
Hey, this is next level of road in this shit.
No.
Oh, we've gone up the tank road again.
Yeah, I know. Over right here on the left somewhere. It's so you don't get stuck in the mud at the bottom. You cross up here and then you go.
And so with that's the end of the video. It is great to see that the Foreign Legion is advancing And with that, we're going to be moving on into the next bit of news near the area of Popasna, where we saw that a Russian mortar got blown up today. Also, they're playing music, but you can see the mortar right there. You can also see some Russian infantry moving around it. We're about to watch the Russian infantry get shelled right there. We now see some ammunition going up in flames inside the trees. We see another Russian outpost that appears to have been hit directly by artillery. We now see a little bit of an ammunition fire. And we can also see a Russian tank. Now we don't see a Russian tank. And so with that, that's the end of the video, and pretty interesting, and nice to see the Ukrainians are still giving it to the Russians. Moving on to the next bit of news, near Svitlodarsk, we saw that a drone dropped a bomblet. And we actually were able to find where this massive explosion happened earlier in the location unknowns. And so we're going to skip over this little video that's just showing where it was on the front lines. And we're now moving down to Donetsk, near the area of Pisky, where we saw that a Russian T-72 was also destroyed. Of course, we have to mute it. But when you see the Russian tank backing up, you see the Russian tank get hit from the side. Didn't we? I feel like we saw this video earlier.
Yeah, it looks familiar.
Yes, we did.
We definitely
saw this one. Yeah. So it looks like we also got a location for that one as well. Or was that in the location unknowns? I feel like it was. No? Odd. Apparently, I had put that down in Pisky as well. I wonder why. Anyways, I'll have to go back and look at that and see why that was there. We'll also delete that one since it's a duplicate. And moving on out of the Donetsk region and on into the southern front, in the small town of Nesteryanka, we saw the Russians getting hit by the 44th Artillery Brigade. And for some reason, it's also a duplicate video. What in the world? I don't even know what in the world is going on with the duplicates anymore, so we're going to delete that one as well. And we're moving on over into the Kherson area, where we can see a Ukrainian Mi-24 firing at the Russians. Also, I like that this pilot took the time to make sure that we knew it was today. He put down the 30th day of the 9th month of 2022. And it's on a whiteboard for us to see. We see the helicopter flying over the countryside. We can now see it's about to start tilting up. It's tilting up. Fires off its rockets. And then, of course, starts popping off its flares and hitting the deck again to get out of there. So with that, that's the end of the video, and it's nice to see that the Russians are still using their attack helicopters to attack the Ukrainians. I mean, wait a minute, what in the world did I just say? It's nice to see that Ukrainian attack helicopters are attacking the Russians still. For some reason,
I just called it, Enforcer. Yeah, I just called it.
I'm starting to pull Bushisms these days because I'm trying to think ahead so much because of the duplicates that I'm now starting to trip over my words. So sorry about that, everyone. And we're now moving on into the center of occupied Kherson, where we saw that more Iskander, some 13 Iskander launchers, are on their way towards Kherson. A very alarming video, but once again, do they even have enough Iskanders to actually field these Iskander launchers? Pretty decent amount of Iskanders. Once again, Russians being transported by freight car like some kind of animals. And rail cars this time too. They actually got a nice little mix of them. some supply trucks. Surprisingly, it looks like they have some pretty off-brand looking ones. They don't look like Kamazes, so unfortunately I don't know which ones these are. And with that, that's the end of the video, and it's nice to see that the Russians are still bringing in the crappy Iskander launchers to try and help out. Will they really help? Probably not, but we'll have to wait and see. And the answer is still no. We're moving on into the Kerch Strait now, where you see that the Russians are still desperately trying to railroad in more supplies as they are bringing in what appears to be an entire tank battalion by rail. Here's the video showing that. We see some BMP-1s, some T-80s, I believe.
Is this Ukraine's new shipment of live targets?
Yes. It's also Russia's support to Ukraine in the war against Russia.
That's right.
Yeah, it's the foreign aid.
Man, I would love to see an A-10 make a strafing run over that.
Yeah, that would actually be pretty interesting to see. So with that, that's the end of that video, and we've now finally covered all of the news from the Southern Front, about in record time and record speed. And so with that, we're now going to be moving up to Kyiv, not to cover the speech, but to cover a massive amount of news that's occurred today, which has already been talked about on stream, and so it kind of lost its fire. But Zelensky did sign the documents to start the fast track for NATO accession, and here is the video of him doing that. Once again, in the same place that he's made almost every video that he's ever been outside in. And so with that, here's the video.
Робимо свій визначальний крок, підписуючи заявку України на вступ у пришвидшеному порядку в НАТО.
It almost looks like he's signing a contract to buy a car. And so with that, that's the end of the video, and hopefully, I don't know about right now, but hopefully Ukraine does join NATO in the near future. And so with that, we're now going to be moving across the river to the area, I guess you could say, the central government area of the city, much like Washington, D.C. has a bit of a central government area. And so, without further ado, here's the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky after I have stumbled over my words. I think the coffee is burning out on me really early tonight, but here's the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky.
Українці, українки, ворог розпочав цей день зі свідомого, абсолютно прорахованого вбивства українців в Запоріжжі, ракетний удар по цивільній автоколоні, станом на цей час 30 загиблих, майже 100 поранених, травмованих. Російські військові знали, куди влучать їхні ракети, це зробили нелюди. Від першого до останнього. Від того, хто дав цей наказ, і до усіх, хто цей наказ виконав. Вони відповідатимуть обов'язково перед законом і перед людьми. Саме тому ми впевнені у нашій перемозі, саме тому ми перебрали ініціативу у війні, саме тому ми зараз досягаємо відчутних результатів на полі битви. І це дуже важливо. Вітаю героїв! Бо ми залишаємось людьми і отримаємо підтримку від людей, від усіх людей світу, від кожного і від кожної, хто відчуває біль, коли дізнається про свідоме вбивство ні в чому невинних людей. В Москві сьогодні відбувся якийсь там черговий, чесно кажучи, фарс. Щось там відзначали, щось там скандували, співали на площі, говорили про Запоріжжя. Коли вони самі ж у Запоріжжі влаштували таке. Нелюди. Вічна пам'ять усім загиблим від російських терактів. Україна сьогодні ухвалила рішення на свій захист. Всі вони будуть реалізовані. Рішення Ради національної безпеки і оборони України і ставки. Я вже детально прозвітував сьогодні в день про нашу заявку на вступ у НАТО за пришвидшеною процедурою та про очевидну готовність України до переговорів з Російською Федерацією, але вже з іншим президентом Росії, який розумітиме, що реально відбувається. Зараз ще хочу додати дещо про рішення РНБО щодо санкцій проти російських фізичних та юридичних осіб. Там великий, дійсно великий перелік, доволі гучні прізвища. Але все ж ми орієнтуємось не на гучність, а на те, щоб реально демонтувати російський вплив і при цьому вплинути на стан речей в самій Російській Федерації. Тож вводяться обмеження проти кількох тисяч суб'єктів. Синхронізуються санкції України і наших партнерів. Вводяться нові санкції проти ключових персоналій, проти значущих російських підприємств. Звичайно, санкції будуть застосовані і до тих громадян інших держав, які взяли участь в російському фарсі на окупованій території нашої держави. Псевдореферендуми – це елементи агресії проти суверенної держави. І кожен, хто причетний до організації чи проведення цього фарсу, буде притягнутий до відповідальності. Сьогодні я говорив з прем'єр-міністрами Японії та Данії. Звичайно, вони засудили чергові російські кроки до ескалації. Я дякую їм за підтримку. Дякую всім лідерам держав, партнерам, всім політичним, громадським діячам світу, які вже доволі оперативно висловились на захист України і міжнародного права. Я хочу подякувати особисто президенту Сполучених Штатів Байдену, Конгресу, нашим друзям в Європі і усім, хто вже посилює санкції проти Росії і вже робить потужні кроки для збільшення оборонної та фінансової підтримки України. Ми маємо звільнити всю нашу землю. І це буде найкращий доказ того, що міжнародне право і людські цінності не зламати жодній державі-терористу. І навіть такій знахабнілій, як Росії. Ми маємо суттєві результати на сході нашої країни. Про це вже достатньо публічної інформації. Всі чули, що відбувається в Лимані, Донецької області. Це кроки, які значать для нас дуже багато. І я дякую усім нашим бійцям за реалізацію цього елементу нашого оборонного задуму. Це дуже важливо. Особливо хочу сьогодні відзначити бійців 10-ї окремої гірсько-штурмової бригади і 54-ї окремої механізованої бригади за незмінну хоробрість, за героїзм на Сіверському та Бахмутському напрямках. А також нашим військовослужбовцям 214-го окремого стрілецького батальйону, сил спеціальних операцій і 103-ї окремої бригади територіальної оборони за звільнення Ямполя. Дякую і підрозділам нашої розвідки ГУРМО, а також Служби безпеки України. Шлях нашої держави складний, шлях зрозумілий. Це шлях незалежності, територіальної цілісності, інтеграції з цивілізованим світом і соціального розвитку. Шлях нашого ворога також абсолютно зрозумілий. Поразка, ганьба і засудження. І ще одне. Щороку, в останній день вересня, Україна відзначає День усиновлення. І це, мені здається, важливий день. Це день особливої шани до тих, чиї серця достатньо великі, щоб дати родинне тепло дітям, які залишились без батьківського піклування. Я дякую сьогодні усім таким українцям, усім таким українкам. Я мрію, що ми прийдемо до такого результату, коли кожна дитинка України відчуватиме родинне тепло, якими б не були обставини життя. Вічна слава нашому прекрасному народу, вічна слава кожному і кожній, хто бореться за Україну. Працюємо заради одного – перемоги. Слава Україні!
And so that is the end of the speech from President Zelensky here on day 220 of the war in Ukraine. And that also wraps up our news segment for tonight. And tonight's been quite a long news segment indeed, at 2 hours and 6 minutes long as of right now. I thank you all so much for watching. If you did enjoy this news segment, please make sure to subscribe, as these streams do run every single day of the week, except for Mondays at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, covering the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine in both pictures and video evidence. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on to the question segment, addressing our polls, all of the super chats that have been sent in, and as many live chats as we possibly can. But before we get to all this, Matthew, I would like to have a quick count on the super chats.
All right, so it looks like I'm trying to do these quick maths in my head real quick. Let's see here. This is gonna be really tough to do in my head. So let me try to do it real quick. It looks like we have 40.
40. Well,
40.
I think, Matthew, we are going to have to put a cutoff on it early because of how long the
Wow.
news segment went on. I thank you all so much for the support. Of course, it helps out this channel greatly, and we are going to answer all of the super chats that have been sent in. But from this point forward, I like if everyone could remind each other, just say it occasionally in the live chat, that there has been a super chat cutoff tonight. If you would like to support this channel and you wanted to send in a super chat, we won't be able to address it tonight. But if you send it in first thing tomorrow, we will be able to address it probably first thing. And so with that, I thank you all so much, once again, for the support. It helps us out a massive deal, and without y'all, this wouldn't be possible. But with that, we're now going to start covering our polls, and also, right after these, our super chats. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so for our final segment of questions, we have one poll to address, and the question is, should NATO draw a red line on tactical nuclear weapons, i.e. respond with nuclear attacks? It looks like 75% said yes, we must deter the use of nukes. 8% said I don't know. 12% said no, that response is too severe. And 6% said no, Ukraine is not in NATO. Now for me, I've already said it. I think that the answer should be yes. We have to deter the use of nukes, both strategic ones and tactical ones. We can't allow that to become a precedent in warfare, to launch nukes around like they're conventional bombs. But that's my take on it. So, Enforcer, what is your take?
My take would be we have to deter the use of nuclear weapons, and I have seen some people misunderstanding what deter means. There is no other way to fight fire than with fire. There's no other way to do anything in the area of deterring without threatening the equal in return. You can't deter nuclear war without the use of nuclear weapons, because what is your counter? If you nuke me, I'm going to go into a conventional war with you. Then they're just going to nuke the military. Okay, well, then I'm going to sanction you. Well, you've been nuked so badly at that point, you don't even have an economy left. So the only counter you have to deter nuclear weapons is threatening to use them in response. And so,
Enforcer, I want to add one more thing on top of it, because I saw a lot of people saying in the live chat that it may be too extreme to use nukes, because somebody had asked me in the live chat, where would you drop a nuke if something were to happen where we needed to respond with nukes in Russia? And honestly, you have to make it severe enough to actually deter Russia. I would say, honestly, Moscow, because why would Russia risk that actually happening, dropping a nuke on Moscow? That would effectively deter them from doing anything stupid in Ukraine with nukes, and it would, in my opinion, prevent them from ever using nukes, because they know the NATO and United States were very serious about it. But if we don't make the threat to Russia strong enough, deterrence won't work. For example, if we try to use a small nuclear weapon, like we'll nuke this small town if you do X, Y, and Z, that's not going to successfully deter Russia.
And that also gives them the time to respond. If nuclear deterrent, I don't think, because I still see a lot of people saying, no nuclear weapons should be used in response at all. I don't think y'all are getting, and I'm not saying y'all are wrong or anything, but I don't think y'all are getting why both sides have nukes in the first place. The premise of the United States uses is mutually assured destruction. If the Russians use nukes, we use nukes on them, both sides lose. That's the deterrent. The deterrent is practically worldwide destruction on a scale that's never been seen in human history, and that's the only way that we can deter the use of nuclear weapons, is to threaten that kind of destruction, worldwide and complete. And so in that regard, I would have to side with the 74% that say we must deter the use of nuclear weapons by threatening the use of nuclear weapons in return. That's the only way you can stop nukes from being used, as the threat of the same thing that you're doing being done against you. And so with that, I hope
And
that...
an enforcer, I saw some folks saying that if one nuke is used, it's all over, it's Armageddon. That's the entire point of deterrence. We want to prevent them from ever using one nuke at all. So the deterrent has to be extreme enough to make them not want to launch that nuke in the first place. So we're not saying that we want to get into a situation where we respond with nukes, but that's needed to create like the circumstances to prevent them from firing one.
And also, I just saw this. This was an interesting one. No one said it could mean a nuclear holocaust. Ukraine is not the U.S. Ukraine is not NATO. And that's correct. But think about this real quick. A lot of countries aren't in NATO. All South America isn't in NATO. Central America, Africa, and the Middle East, and a lot of the all the Stand Series countries are not in NATO. Also, Japan's not in NATO. South Korea is not in NATO. None of Indochina, or I guess you could say Southeast Asia, is in any kind of NATO alliance or an alliance with us. And so really the entire world's not in NATO. And so if we go off of that principle, who's to say that the Russians aren't going to start some kind of new nuclear imperialism where they go around and say, hey, either you capitulate your government and you become a pro-Russian puppet, or we just start nuking you because you don't really have any counter to this. That would begin a terrible precedent. It's one that we cannot accept. That's one that we cannot allow. The Russians would build a sphere of influence just off of their use of nuclear weapons and the threat of them alone. And for that reason, it cannot be allowed to stand. And I mean, I can't really add on too much to it. It seems straightforward to me. That's why we're where we're at now, with the United States and Russia having thousands of nuclear weapons apiece, is that they are not supposed to be used at all, and the threat of even using one of them is that the U.S. or Russia will use all of theirs against the, I guess you could say, offending party. And so with that, I hope that does address the comment fairly well. I know that a lot of people don't like nukes, but just because you refuse to use nukes doesn't mean that that other person over in another country will never use nukes as well. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and moving on from our polls, because that was the only one for now, our first super chat is from Enforcer for President, who puts in a $50 donation and says, "Happy birthday, Enforcer Matt." And thank you, Enforcer for President, for that. I'm not sure if you actually meant that as a joke or you seriously thought it was my birthday, but either way, thank you very much for that, and for continuing the joke. So thank you very much for also being a longtime channel viewer. And Enforcer, would you like to add anything?
Yes, and I thank you so much for the birthday wishes to Matthew, Enforcer for President. He is not turning a new age at this point, but we do appreciate the sentiments. If that was a joke, I hope it was. If it wasn't, then I'm sorry, but you got had by someone who sat there and just came up with something out of the blue. But thank you so much once again for the support, Enforcer President. You've been an old guard on this channel in Lee Spring Army, and I thank you so much for supporting us through and through. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
And next up, we have a $50 super chat from BC Skyman, who says, "Now that Ukraine is invading Russia, how will Putin respond?" Well, he'll bring out all of the new tanks from storage now, will he? Awesome job, Enforcers.
And I thank you so much for the support, and I would have to agree with you. That's about the only way they can respond at this point. Considering that the Ukrainians have now encircled the 5th Army in Lyman, and I know, and people have been saying, where in the world are you getting this number of 10 to 15,000? That's on the high end. It really could be anywhere in between around 3 to 15,000 soldiers, although it's probably nearer to the lower end of around 5 to 7,000 as a broad assumption. Because 15,000 soldiers in a village as small as Lyman, that place would be like New York City in terms of its density. So I don't believe that that's probably the high end number. But moving on from that, I would have to say that's really all they have left. And so we're probably about to start seeing the T-55s get rolled out before long. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And of course, thank you so much for helping out this channel and helping us to keep this thing rolling. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
And up next, a big shout out to Evira Anthony and also Mark Raven for each putting in a $50 donation. And thank you very much to both of you guys for the support. And even though you didn't leave a comment, we do appreciate it very much. And the Enforcer is going to add a few words himself.
Yes, I will. I thank both of y'all so much for the support. Y'all didn't throw in comments, but y'all did throw in support, which says a lot. It says that y'all enjoy this channel, the coverage we give, and want it to continue on. And as long as we are able to keep this channel alive, keep foods in our stomachs, and the lights on, we will make sure to keep doing just that. And so thank you so much once again for the support. It helps us out greatly, and I thank you both once again. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and moving on to our next one, we have another $50 super chat from the legend BC Skyman, who says, have you seen that Russia is mobilizing all new recruits from different ethnic groups and small towns? Very few are being forced to mobilize from Moscow and St. Petersburg, Slava Ukraini.
And thank you so much for the support. And I have seen that. We've seen a lot of that in Dagestan. It seems like Dagestan has now become the, I guess you could say, recruitment capital of Russia, as we've seen many protests and riots and a lot of crazy stuff happening down there, to the point that the governor of Dagestan himself came out and started talking about a Russian police car going around with a megaphone that's been commandeered by a commissar, yelling out all able-bodied men need to go to the conscription office to go join the military right now. And so we have been seeing that, and it is a pretty jacked up reality in Russia, is that they keep on picking the Siberian, and I guess you could say the more Muslim people of southern Russia than the actual, I guess you could say, white Rus Russians of the, I guess you could say, central and western areas of like the western end of the country. And so with that, I hope that addresses the comment fairly well, and is a pretty jacked up reality of the Russians. They exhibit their own forms of racism against their own people, and I would say it's pretty severe. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
All right, and moving on to our next one, we have a $50 super chat from Will Riley, who's not Mr. Dick Cheney tonight, but he puts in a $50 donation and says the U.S. response to a nuclear strike will be as follows. All Russian ships, to include merchant vessels, will be seized and sunk, communication networks will be disabled, electrical grids will be disabled, and no-fly zones established around launch sites.
Well, I thank you for the support, and that is an interesting suggestion. However, destroying and sinking Russian merchant ships and naval vessels is only starting the Third World War. And even if we do strike at Russia's infrastructure and logistics, that still does give them the time to respond. And that's something that we largely would want to avoid. And I know that I did throw out an ultimatum earlier where I said, 24-hour deadline, or we start bombing campaigns. And as a prelude to nuclear war, if we were thinking that this could be resolved just by a quick little conventional war that then got everything, I guess you could say, it's to the negotiating table, that would be one. Well, actually, yeah, we'll talk about it on that premise instead of talking about from the nuclear stance. That's a whole other topic. That is a pretty good idea. But at the same time, that doesn't provide, because at that point the Russians would fully mobilize because they would be going to war with the West as well. I think we would have to move in the army. We'd have to add something to that plan, like moving in the army, the U.S. Army, or the entirety of a NATO coalition into Ukraine and onto the border of the Baltics to make sure that we could prepare for what the Russians would probably try and do on the continent. And so with that, I hope that does address the comment fairly well, Will Riley. And it's very odd to see that you're in here tonight and you're not Dick Cheney. A twist indeed. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
All right, and moving on to the next one, we have a $40 super chat from Praise Adonai, who says, Enforcer and Matt, thanks for all the work you do. It makes me want to holler, yeah! On a more serious note, though, who do you think bombed the Nord Stream pipeline? I wonder what Sam Elliott thinks. Keep up the morale. Slava Ukraini.
Have you ever wanted the natural gas from your brand new Nord Stream pipeline? Well, unfortunately, you're going to be out of luck. The Nord Stream pipeline was blown up by the pulling power of a Ford F-150. Attach a chain to that thing and let it rip, because that pipeline is coming apart by next week. But getting serious on the Nord Stream pipeline and answering that question, I would have to say that it was probably... It's really hard to say, because I actually saw a clip the other day. Speaking about the U.S. government, I saw the President of the United States about 3 weeks ago. Well, not 3 weeks ago. I believe it was about a month or two ago at a press conference. And he had stated that if the Russians continue on any kind of actions or anything similar, that the Nord Stream pipelines would be taken down. And then the reporter said, well, Mr. President, that's something in between the Germans and the Russians. How would you do that? And he said, oh, we got ways. And so then started throwing into my mind, well, what if this was something done by the United States to sabotage the Russian economy indirectly? And if it was, a masterclass move, because everyone right now is thinking that it's the Russians, and I still think it's the Russians, but it does throw in the question, maybe it was the United States that struck the pipelines to cripple the Russian economy beyond belief. In case if y'all didn't know, that is, I guess you could say, the only remaining physical connection economically in between Russia and the Western world as a whole. And so it seems like that may be something that the United States possibly could have done. But once again, I can't really say for certain who's done it at this point. That threw enough doubt in my head that I can't say with certainty that the Russians would have sabotaged it. They still were making money off of all of that natural gas that was making its way to Germany, even if the pipeline had been shut off. And so with that...
Although, Enforcer, I could see where definitely blowing up the pipeline from the United States perspective would have a really bad impact on Russia's economy, but wouldn't it also backfire and have a really bad effect on Europe?
Well, this goes into a whole entire thing on oil shipments, which I actually watched a podcast on. I unfortunately forgot the name of it, but interestingly enough, did you know this, Matthew? Speaking of oil, the bulk oil tankers, the biggest ones in the world, some of the biggest ships out there in terms of length, when they're sailing around the world, they will actually change course if the price of oil is just a few cents higher in another country. So let's say that these oil tankers were on their way to Syria, for some reason. And then the price of oil, the price of oil per barrel, just went a few cents higher in Germany. Those oil tankers are going to change course immediately from Syria to Germany to go drop off their oil there. I didn't know that that's how the world economy worked, but I was watching a whole entire thing about oil experts and also captains of these oil tankers, and they said that's how the economy works. And so if that, in the comment of saying that the Europeans are going to freeze, they won't. They will just start to offer to buy natural gas and oil at higher prices, mostly natural gas, considering that's what the Nord Stream was for. And these tankers will just immediately start to change course, and people will start to sell their oil to the Europeans because they're willing to pay a bit of a higher price. Then, in turn, that makes the entire world market's price per barrel of oil rise a bit. Depending on how much the Germans need and the rest of Europe needs, it could start to rise, I guess you could say, moderately. And so with that, I hope that does answer that question. Good point, Matthew. But I don't think it'll hurt them too much, because it's not like... And everyone keeps on acting like Germany is, I guess you could say, on the economic level of Somalia. They have no economy or no wealth to work off of. The continent of Europe is the wealthiest continent in the world. It even beats out I believe, North America. And so they will go to any lengths and pay any amount of money to get the natural gas and oil that they need to make sure to keep themselves from freezing in the winter. And I think that's something that not a lot of people consider when talking about the richest continent on Earth. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And I hope that it addressed that question fairly well. And thank you so much once again for the support and an interesting question. That was a really good one.
All right, and up next, we have a $40 super chat from Mark, the ex-Orc Sanguinator, once again, who says, bonus, you were too slow. And Mark, thank you very much for the support. I think he's already gotten off for the night, but if you rewatch the stream tomorrow, hopefully you'll get to hear this part. But thank you once again for the support, Mark, and I'm so sad I was too slow.
And I thank you so much for the support once again, Mark. And I gotta say, the support you've been giving this channel is unbelievable. You've helped us out drastically over this past week almost, with massive amounts of support and helping us to keep this channel running. And it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on here. You've had some incredibly interesting questions, and of course, you've had some incredibly interesting, funny moments with us, like the ones we had tonight. Of course, thank you so much for the support. We encouraged you not to send in another one, yet you did. And I just got to say thank you so much once again for your unwavering support to this channel and helping the Lee Spring Army to keep on going forward. And I'm sorry that Matthews was a little slow. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again for the support.
All right, and let's see here. Real quick to go over a poll I put up a while ago. The question was, do you think if NATO issued a red line that it would be taken seriously by Russia? 54% said yes, NATO's credibility is strong. 30% said I don't know, maybe. And 16% said no, NATO's credibility is weak. Now, on this one, I would fall within the 30%. I don't know, and maybe because I think personally that NATO has some fixing to do with their reputation. I think we've sort of gotten to a point where we make statements and don't follow through. But at the same time, we are strong because we are helping out Ukraine. So we're somewhere in the middle. But we definitely have some improvement to work on with our, I guess, our credibility and follow through. But Enforcer, what do you think?
I would say those were great points. And another thing I'd add to it is that one thing that I see in the live chat a lot is that a lot of people are willing to say, yes, we should respond, fight fire with the Russians. And then when I say, well, if they do use nuclear weapons, we have to use nuclear weapons. And then I kind of see what kind of happens with Russian people who say, yes, I would fight in this war. And then when they're told, okay, you're going to fight, people want to jump ship. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's human nature. No one wants to see the world burn in a fiery hellfire of a nuclear exchange. That's something no one wants to see. But we have to make sure that we are mentally there when we say these threats. Otherwise, the Russians will already know from the start we're bluffing. If the Russians say, we're using tactical nukes in Ukraine, and we can go, no, you don't. We're going to use nuclear weapons on you. And then it's publicly seen, easily seen, that we all go, oh, we would never want to do that. In fact, we don't want to use nuclear weapons at all. They know we're bluffing. They'll do whatever they want, and then they'll see that we won't respond because the follow-through is not there. We have to be mentally committed to this is the line that will not be crossed. If this line is crossed, we are willing to see the entire world end because of it. And that is what's going to ensure that that line will never be crossed and this event will never happen, is that our commitment will be so surefire that if you do this one thing, we're willing to see all of human history in the Northern Hemisphere erased off the face of the earth. The Russians, the West, everyone. It will all be gone. Because the Russians want to make one stupid move. And it's up to the Russians. Do you want to make that call? Do you really want to see what's about to happen because of it? And then that will scare them so much that they won't do it. And I know that sounds very extreme, and it sounds insane nearly, and I'd have to agree. To say that we would end the entire world over one thing sounds nuts. But I can tell you all this. We've already gone 70 years ago through the idea of appeasement and just letting things slide. Maybe if the Germans just annex Czechoslovakia, maybe everything will just disappear and it'll go away. And it didn't. We ended up going through the bloodiest war in human history because of that decision of, let's let it slide. Maybe it'll go away. A red line has to be drawn, much like it should have been done in the late 30s before World War II, and it has to be drawn now. Otherwise, things are going to keep on spiraling out of control, and we're going to watch worse and worse things happen until we finally get drawn into it, even if we didn't want to. And so we've got to set that line right here and right now. And we got to make sure that our threats are credible and believable. And so with that, I hope that does address the poll fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and moving on to our next Super Chat question, we have a $30 donation from Oats Air, who says, what do you expect to happen now that Ukraine has signed their application to NATO, and what would this mean to other NATO countries and Slava Ukraine?
And thank you so much for the support. It helps out the channel a lot. And to answer that question, with NATO fast-tracking their way, with Ukraine, oh my gosh, I'm doing so many Bushisms. Put food on your family. Fish and humans can coexist peacefully. What else did he do? Fool me once.
Fool me once, shame on you.
Fool me twice.
Look, fool me once, you can't. I said it the right way. It's hard to screw that up. I don't know how he did it.
Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice. Look, you fool me once, you can't fool me again. But moving on from the Bushisms, if Ukraine tried to fast track their way into NATO, NATO was most likely going to reject it at the moment. It will be seriously considered. That's one thing that's for certain, but it will be rejected in the end due to the current situation. But if they did join NATO during this current war, it would almost instantly invoke Article 5 because they're at war and they're being attacked right now. And so if they are a NATO member, they become one in the midst of this war, and any of their forces are attacked immediately after its ratification, it invokes Article 5, technically. And so then it becomes a question of, are we going to start trying to bend the rules with Article 5 and say, well, it doesn't pertain to Ukraine now, it pertains to Ukraine at a later date. And then that starts throwing in a load of issues that would become incredibly complicated, specifically for NATO. So, with that, I would have to say it would throw in some serious issues if they joined right now, but if they joined after the war, it would be like any other country, like Finland and Sweden joining. It wouldn't cause too much of an issue, and they would just join. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question fairly well. And thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $30 super chat from Eric Bouchot, who says, nothing to report from my side. You can pick a random question from the chat if you like. Over and out. And Eric, thank you very much for the support. And as always, we will honor the request. This one is sponsored by Eric Bouchot and goes to Sittin' and Thinkin', who says, does attacking NATO nations' energy infrastructure trigger Article 5?
It does not, because that pipeline is...
What? Really?
Well...
Oh, they mean the pipeline.
Yeah, that's why I took it in context of is the specific pipeline. That pipeline where it was attacked, I believe it's in international waters. Also, it is, I believe, Russian-owned. The Russians did construct it. It is operated by Gazprom, which is a Russian company, and so technically it's Russian property, and if it was destroyed, even if it does directly pertain to the infrastructure of NATO, I guess in a way with Germany, I don't really think it would be crossing any Article 5 bounds. Because then you could start drawing massive leaps from that. Kind of like the interstate commerce clause is used in the United States to justify things that don't even have anything to do with the interstate commerce clause. But that's getting into the Supreme Court and what they do and all that stuff. But talking about Europe, let's just say this, for example. Let's say an oil tanker that's on its way from Iraq through the Strait of Hormuz and around its way to Italy, which is a NATO member. In between there, this Iraqi tanker was attacked by the Iranians and sank. And all that oil that was supposed to be going to Italy ended up floating around on the top of the Persian Gulf. Would that invoke Article 5, considering that in a way is the maintenance of infrastructure for a NATO country? You would start getting into territory like that if that was considered to be a viable, I guess you could say, statement. And that starts to spread out the use of Article 5 a little bit too much, where Article 5 could really be invoked over any disruption to NATO in any form. So I would have to say probably not. But then again, I may be wrong. It may be interpreted a different way. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. Someone said, isn't Germany part owner of the Nord Stream? Let's pull that up. Who owns the Nord Stream?
I think one of the German government officials sanctioned it a while ago.
Gazprom. Nord Stream is a majority-owned Russian energy company, Gazprom, and Nord Stream 2 is owned by a Swiss subsidiary of Gazprom. And the U.S. criticized both pipelines, saying they made Europe, especially Germany, too dependent on Russia. Germany never opened the Nord Stream 2 as a stance against Russian aggression. So right there we can see that it's majority Russian-owned, and the Nord Stream 2, which was never opened, was actually a Swiss subsidiary, which makes it, of course, neutral, of Gazprom, which is still a Russian-owned company. So in the largest sense, it is Russian-owned and Russian property. And so with that, I hope that does address that question as best as we can, and we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $25 super chat from Gary Robbins, who says, Slava Ukraine, I will someone else ask a question. And Gary, we will someone else ask a question. So thank you very much for the support. And this one is sponsored by Gary Robbins. And the live chat question goes to David Simonetti, who says, is not indicting Putin as a war criminal a political decision? And David, personally for me, I think it's just basically a decision of practicality. There's really no way to prosecute him, so to indict him would kind of be meaningless right now at this point, but maybe in the future it would be possible.
And I would have to agree with Matthew there. I think indicting him would be pointless. There's really no way to go into, and I think Matthew is actually getting the hang of this stuff because he's heard me say it so many times. And if you knew this before, kudos to you, Matthew, because Matthew's actually pretty smart when it comes to this kind of stuff. Like the identification of tanks and stuff like that, that's more my strong suit. But Matthew's really much into, I guess you could say, world economy, and he's also, I believe, believe it or not, although we make a huge stance against anything political on this channel, I believe he's actually a political science major, if I'm correct.
Yes, I am.
And he is. So with that,
I study this stuff.
Yeah, so I don't think that Putin would be indicting Putin would make any sense, because there's really no way to go and get him. And so with that, I hope that does address the comment fairly well, and I thank you so much for the support. It helps out this channel greatly. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And up next, we have a $25 super chat from G Rock, who says, G Rock, okay. Now, Matthew Broderick was 23 years old when he shot the film Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Matt really is Ferris. And G Rock, I actually haven't had the chance to watch that movie. I've actually been studying for midterms. It's been kind of a stressful week. And also next week's midterms as well. So I'll have to get around to watching that sometime after the midterms are over. But yeah, I can kind of see the resemblance, like we discussed a while ago.
And I would have to agree as well. But he does look a lot like Ferris Bueller. We will try and watch that movie at some point, but we are incredibly busy all the time. College has gotten really busy for the both of us. It's one of our last semesters, and so the classes have kind of bumped up in difficulty a little bit, and also the amount of time we have to spend on them. But we will try and watch it at some point in between the 60 to 50 hours of work each week on this channel, and then about the 15 hours I spend on college too. So combined 75 hours. But with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
All right, and up next we have a $22 super chat from Terrace McGitz, who says, "Hi guys, do you remember when Ukrainian soldiers were surrounded, laid down their guns, and made to walk through the safety corridor, negotiated by both sides, and were murdered by the Ruskies? Will there be another corridor?"
I don't remember that corridor. I think that was supposed
I
to...
do.
When did that happen?
It was near the beginning. It was like one of the first ceasefires that Russia called and said, we'll allow safe passage for some of these soldiers to leave or citizens, and then they decided to go ahead and go back on that promises. And as they were leaving, bombed them.
What city was that? Do you remember?
I don't recall. I couldn't even begin to tell you, to be totally honest.
Dang it.
I can't remember at all.
I remember humanitarian corridors being opened in places like Sumy, Mariupol, and I believe Melitopol, but I don't remember corridors for the military to retreat out of being used. That's one thing I don't remember. So, going off of the humanitarian corridors as a principle, also I see some people saying it was the citizens, and then some people are saying, okay, someone said Mariupol. Mariupol?
I think it was soldiers and citizens, but I might be wrong on that.
So a lot of people are saying Mariupol, and for some reason, maybe it's just because the war has gone on so long and I've had to look and see it so much, I don't remember that specific corridor. But if it did happen, and I'm assuming it did, considering that everyone's memory is rather vivid of it.
Ilovaisk.
Ilovaisk, I believe. Ilovaisk in the Donetsk Oblast. Zoom out. Ilovaisk, it's behind Donetsk, so I wouldn't know about that. Also, what a dirty train. Anyways, moving on from that. Unfortunately, I don't remember the humanitarian corridor. Can you reread that super chat again real quick?
He says, "Do you remember when Ukrainian soldiers were surrounded, laid down their guns, and made to walk through the safety corridor, negotiated by both sides, and were murdered by the Ruskies? Will there be another corridor?"
I remember humanitarian corridors, and the Russians would fire on civilians through there in the Sumy area and the Mariupol area, and it got quite nasty at times, and the pictures and the videos that came out were even more horrendous. But going over that, I do not remember that specific corridor. I see a lot of... Everyone's saying it was in 2014. So unfortunately, that was before my time in this war. So unfortunately, I don't really have a vivid memory of that. Also, I think at that time, I would have been around 12? Yeah, I would have been around 12 years old. So I wasn't really that into everything to be in the know on that one. But I would have to say that I do know about the humanitarian corridors now and how terrible those are. And if you're talking about the 5th Army having a humanitarian corridor made for them to get out of Lyman, I would feel not. Those forces would rejoin with the Russians. They would keep their manpower intact, and I feel like the Ukrainians would not want the Russians to keep any of their manpower if possible. And so they'll most likely try and starve them out. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well. And we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
All right, and up next we have a, let's see here, one second. My spreadsheet has locked up on me. I don't know why. Come on now. There we go. So up next we have a $20 super chat from Kaltenberg, who says, "Happy Friday, Enforcers and LSA." And yes, it is Friday. I forgot about that.
And it is Friday. If you are me or Enforcer Matt, time starts to mesh together. I've lost track of the days and the weeks and everything because this is what I do all the time. But yes, I do. I do enjoy Fridays, if I can even remember that they're here. And so thank you so much for the congratulations for making it to a Friday. We finally did it. And thank you so much once again for helping out this channel, Kaltenberg, and always being here and enjoying these streams. And so thank you so much once again. And with that, we are on to the next one. And how many Super Chats do we have left, Matthew?
Let's see here. We have about... 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's see. About 35.
35?
Yes.
All right. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, this one did come in after the cutoff, but just to go ahead and recognize it real quick, it's a $40 super chat from Santa Dean, who says, what will the watchers, UFO drivers who have been observing our nuclear capabilities, do if Russia uses nukes?
Real quick, I'm not familiar with the watchers. The watchers.
I personally don't think the UFO drivers will do anything. They're just the drivers.
I don't think they'll do much. They're probably just paid by commission like an Uber. The watchers UFO. Unfortunately, I don't know.
I think they just mean the watchers, basically like referring to aliens that they think are watching or something.
Well, I don't know a lot about aliens. I don't think they do anything because they're probably not out there. But I do thank you for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And thank you so much once again for the support. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
If I was an alien observing what's going on right now, I would probably head back to wherever I came from at this point. But anyways, up next, we have a $20 super chat from DL Hemingway, who says, how many orcs choose to live?
Not a lot. We can already see.
Wait a minute, hold on. Let's see. Let me see if I read that properly. How many orcs choose live?
Not a lot. Still, my answer to that is the same. I just got done making this news, watching multiple videos before this stream aired of more Russians being loaded into trucks that were dead on the side of the road. And I just don't think a lot of them choose to live, and a lot of them do stupid things to ensure that they don't choose life. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well. And thank you so much once again for the support. It helps us out a lot, and it helps this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $20 super chat from Santiago Flores, who says, I'm donating a question to the live chat, and thank you very much. And thank you very much, Santiago, for the support as always. You're also one of our channel legends, and we appreciate it very much. And the live chat question goes to, let's see here. Looking through here real quick. Looking through. It goes to Teluvian, who says, didn't the Russians fight the rebels in Syria? Where is their choice to pick their destination?
Can you read that one again real quick?
He said, didn't the Russians fight the rebels in Syria? Where is their choice to pick their destination?
They did fight the rebels in Syria. They actually supported the Bashar al-Assad regime, and they fought against the Syrian Democratic Forces as well as ISIS, and I believe another group. But unfortunately, I forgot the other group. I think they're largely non-existent now. But yes, they did fight against, I guess you could call them, the rebels in Syria. I don't know what the last part of that question means. Do you know what it means, Matthew?
I'm not really sure, to be honest.
So unfortunately, I don't know what it means to be able to answer it well. But I hope I've been able to answer that question so far. And I thank you so much once again for the support. Hope that does answer the question fairly well. And we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
And next up, we have another $20 super chat from Santiago Flores, who says, to quote the title of the speech that sent the Spanish Blue Division to fight against Russia in 1941, Russia is guilty and Russia should be removed from the UN Security Council. Why reward the criminal?
That was used in 1941?
Apparently so.
Well, unfortunately, the United Nations did not exist yet in 1941, so I don't think that was used for the Blue Legion to go and fight in the Second World War. So with that, I thank you for the support. Unfortunately, I don't really think there's a lot for me to work with there because historically, I don't think that would have happened. Let me check this real quick. When was it? Should have been 1949. UN founded. 1945. So still, that would have been 4 years. It's junior, I guess you could say. And so I don't think that could have been spoken to them. But with that,
I think, and Enforcer, I think he might have just meant Russia is guilty to be the title of the speech, maybe. I'm not really sure.
Maybe. I'm not entirely sure. But I do thank you for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $20 super chat from Superbunker 9000 who says, the Enforcer duo rocks the YouTube world. Coffee and donuts for you guys. Slava Ukraine. And chat question, please. Okies suck, LOL.
And who sent that in?
Superbunker 9000, the representative of NAFO.
Oh, yeah, and also a representative of Texas. That is a counter to PSYOP statements. And thank you so much for the support to the Coffee and Donut Fund. I've got to be honest with y'all. Tonight, I am feeling down in the dumps. I mean, like, I don't know what it is. The coffee's crashed. I don't have any caffeine in me. I feel hot. I feel kind of sick. So I'm sorry about that, everyone. But I do thank you for the support for the Coffee and Donut Fund. And that's also why, if y'all have noticed, I have had some very memorable slip-ups tonight, like saying the Ukrainians are attacking the Ukrainians and other kinds of stuff, because I'm hardly hanging in here. So sorry about that, everyone. But with that, let's answer a live chat question in honor of Super Bonker's support.
All right, and that live chat question goes to Kellen Hansen, who says, what is Putin's next move if the West doesn't buy his bluster and threats?
And can you reread that one again?
What is Putin's next move if the West doesn't buy his bluster and threats?
The West's next move, if he doesn't buy into the threats, will most likely, it's one of two things. We will never know for certain what it will be until the moment of action or no action. A very vague statement, a very stupid one, but let's give it a little bit of detail to make sure it's not fake and stupid. Either we'll intervene militarily in the conflict, or we won't. If we don't, we'll look like we're a pushover. If we do, it looks like we'll be upholding our commitments and our threats. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question fairly well. And thank you so much for the support, Superbonker 9000, and helping this channel to keep on running. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
And up next, we have a $20 super chat from B Syndicate, who says, the one advantage to being homesick is being able to catch the stream live. Thanks for all the info. Glory to the LSA and glory to Ukraine. And B Syndicate, we hope you get feeling better soon, and thank you for the support as well.
And thank you so much for the support, B Syndicate. I hope you have been enjoying us during, I guess you say, a downtime, and I hope that you do get better. Of course, it's not good to be sick. It's not good to not feel good. I would know. I don't really feel great right now. So I thank you so much for the support, and I hope you hang in there. I hope you get through it perfectly fine, and that you're able to be on these streams in the best of health. And of course, go around in your daily life in the best of health, which is probably far more important. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support, and thank you so much once again for helping this channel to keep running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $20 super chat from William Arens, who says, Enforcer isn't the responsible thing for a commander of besieged, badly supplied, and demoralized soldiers can do is surrender. Could such surrenders at Lyman and elsewhere lead to a Russian collapse and rapid retreat?
It most likely wouldn't lead to a Russian collapse. I would show y'all a clip if we weren't pressed for time, which I think we are. How many super chats do we have left?
We have, let's see, about 28.
Ooh, yikes. Yeah, we are pressed for time. I would have to say it most likely wouldn't lead to a collapse of the Russian front, but it would certainly lead to a demoralization of Russian forces and most likely more panic at home, as that news you can't really hide, with everyone missing and your family members calling you up that were in the military and saying, I'm now a prisoner of war. It would get around pretty quickly that things are falling apart, and it would cause a lot of domestic issues in Russia. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does answer the question fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $20 super chat from Psyops, who returns from a small hiatus and says, I hear 97% of voters are in favor of me annexing and replacing Matt with my puppet, Robo Matt. The fact that they claim 97% of voters, what group of people could ever agree that much? And you know who could do that? Russian citizens held at gunpoint by their own government.
And also Ukrainian citizens in occupied territory that are being having armed guards knock on their doors and ask them the question. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support, Psyops, and also thank you for suggesting the return of Robomat. Robomat probably will never return, but he was a welcome addition for about the 5 minutes he existed several nights ago. And so
he was a good guy.
He was a solid fella. I gotta say, respectable guy. And so with that, I hope that answers the comment fairly well. And thank you so much once again for the support, Psyops. And welcome back. It's been a while since you've been here. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $20 super chat from Blaze Counter. And Blaze, thank you very much for the support, first of all. But you didn't have to put in support for that issue. I would have dealt with it without the support. But thank you anyways, and I will look into it. And I did see that you had sent me, I believe, a message on Discord, and I will be getting with you very soon about that. But thank you very much for the support. And up next, we have a $14 super chat from Davis Campbell, who does not leave a comment, but thank you very much for the support as well. Up next, we have a $10 super chat from Still Thinking, who says, Enforcer and Enforcer Matt, I have watched you guys since about day 70. Just wanted to show you guys a little support, and Slava Ukraini.
And thank you so much for the support and helping out this channel, and also the kind words as well. Of course, it means a lot to us for people to enjoy this channel. And of course, without y'all support, it wouldn't be possible for the channel to be here to even get support to keep the channel running. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
Up next, we have a $10 super chat from William Allen, who says, the Ukrainian forces should just lay siege to the town and keep moving east. What are your thoughts?
I believe that is the best route of action. Trying to fight through the city could incur casualties, considering that there may be thousands of Russians in there. It may get a little bit bloody before they surrender, and I think it would be the best for the Ukrainians to save ammunition and men to just besiege the city and starve them out and wait for them to surrender, instead of trying to aggressively push through the city and destroy them. And so with that, I hope that does address the comment fairly well, and thank you so much, William Allen, for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And real quick, to address our final poll of the night, I said, who do you think blew up the Nord Stream pipeline? It looks like 74% said Russia, 2% said Ukraine, 15% said United States, and 9% said none of the above. And real quick, for my piece on this one, I'm starting to think that Russia may not be the culprit. I originally thought that they probably and most likely were, but the more I'm hearing about how they built it, they had a stake in it, it hurts their economy if it gets blown up. I'm not really sure why they would blow it up, but it's really hard to say who did it, and to say United States did it or anybody else is kind of just wild speculation, but it could have been anyone. I think all the possibilities are still on the table for this one. But Enforcer, what do you think?
I would have to say I'm kind of in an even split in between either the Russians blowing it up or America blowing up. It would make sense for us to do it, as it would be an economic punishment against the Russians and ensuring that their economy would almost be permanently sabotaged for the next several years. And also, I could see the Russians doing it, as it could cut them off from Germany, and also leave the Germans with natural gas before they thought they would start to have to look for new stores. So I could really see it either way, honestly. And so with that, I hope that I addressed the poll fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat, excuse me, from the Ukester. I totally lost it there. But the Ukester says, isn't it a little suspicious that Russia is letting so many men leave the country? Why would they do that?
Well, it's not really suspicious, because you got to remember that that the central government doesn't have an exact control over every border checkpoint. So these guys in Russia could be arriving at the checkpoint. The Russian border guards are like, I understand your plight. Come on through. You can leave. And then they just let them through. I don't think it's too weird, because it's quite normal. We saw a lot of Ukrainian men leave Ukraine even after the order and law had been passed that they couldn't leave. And so with that, I hope that addresses the comment fairly well. I thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Craig Platel, who says, NATO had a common fund based on GDP. 2021 budget was $3.1 billion. It covers admin costs, etc. Last year used $360 million to build storage in Poland for U.S. equipment.
And I thank you so much for the support, and I thank you for adding in that little tidbit of information. It is good to know that NATO does collect dues, and that they also do spend the money as well. Apparently on NATO projects, which makes a lot of sense. So with that, I thank you so much for the support and providing that information to us, so that way we can all kind of learn a little bit something new here. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And moving on to our next one, which is from Tim Swenson, who puts in a $10 donation. He says, I think the Russian prisoners in the trucks going to war are probably protesters arrested by the Russian police.
Oh man, that's getting deep, and that might be true. But then again, we're not entirely sure. We just know that they are prisoners. But I think that it is a really good shot at who those prisoners may have been. And you got to imagine how demoralized those people will be if they're sent to the front lines. They will practically just surrender and start fragging their officers. And so with that, I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from BL Parak, who says, if Belarus joins the war, could Poland and NATO declare war on Belarus and attack Belarus directly, but not enter Ukraine? Just the threat of this would keep Belarus out of the war. Ooh, yikes.
I'm not entirely sure. I feel like if they did something like that, the Russians would guarantee... Oh, wait a minute. Hang on. I forgot. Belarus is actually a member of the CSTO, which is Russia's equivalent of NATO, and so Russia would be obligated to defend Belarus from a foreign attack. So
Russia definitely wouldn't like that.
Yeah, the answer to that would have to be no. And so with that, I hope that does address the comment fairly well. It's a great idea, but of course the CSTO kind of is Russia's counter to NATO. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
And next up, we have another $10 super chat from Will Riley, who is Mr. Dick Cheney this time. He says, what I stated before is the official U.S. response to a tactical strike per Dick Cheney.
And I thank you for the support, Will Riley, and it's good to hear that Dick Cheney is still out there and he is still formulating his plans. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again for the support, Will Riley, and also keeping up the classic tradition.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat from BL Parak, who says, many of the tactical nukes are larger than the bomb that destroyed much of Hiroshima.
And that's true. It kind of puts into scale how big the atomic bombs were. They weren't really that large, but they were still incredibly destructive. I believe the one dropped on Hiroshima killed around 78,000 people, which is rather high. But still, I do thank you for the support, and that is something to be considered. However, they are still rather small in scale when it comes to nuclear weapons. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat from Canis XV, who says, hi from southern Germany. I work in purchasing of an automotive corporation, and so far the gas price increase for the suppliers have been manageable. It only affect lower income households thus far.
And I thank you for the support and also adding in that information. Southern Germany, I'm assuming that you're in the area of Bavaria, or further west towards the Rhineland, or in between. And that's really cool. And also another thing, it's good to know from Germany what the actual situation is. And apparently it's not as bad as a lot of people are trying to make it out to be, which I believe are kind of pro-Russian in a way. So with that, I thank you so much for the support and also providing us with that information. And it is good to know that so far Germany is keeping the gas prices manageable. And of course, there's many ways to do that, but we'll cover that probably in another stream. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much for the support and also giving us a little bit of knowledge to work off of.
And up next, we have an $8 super chat from Putin will hang in the middle of the Kremlin. Excuse me. My crystal ball cracked. Rasputin is still alive? ? I think he is after lithium in Ukrainian soil. They've got plenty. I'm on my break and going back to work. Angry face, mad face, cussing face. I'll have to watch it later on tonight.
Well, I thank you so much for the support, Putin will hang in the middle of the Kremlin. And I don't think this war is being fought for resources. It seems that this entire war is being fought over Russia's strategic standing in Europe, but there may be a secondary reason for the resources. But I believe the primary one is still the strategic standing of Russia. And so with that, still a very good suggestion. Ukraine is resource rich in a lot of things. They have some natural gas deposits there. They are the #1 producer of sunflower seed oil and neon worldwide. And so I guess you could say that it could be a war over resources in one form or another. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one. I hope you had a good shift at work that wasn't too bad. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Heather Thames, who says, do you think if when Putin realizes he's lost, he will use nuclear weapons against the countries that helped Ukraine and Ukraine too? And Heather, real quick, I know I'm putting a lot of thoughts in on the nuclear topic, but I will say that I don't think he'll use nukes against countries that helped Ukraine, but I think he would use nukes against Ukraine if he realizes he was going to definitely lose.
I'm not entirely sure if he would or wouldn't, because if he uses nukes against Ukraine, that may look like a loser strategy and freak out the Russian public, who is already war weary, into absolute rebellion, and may even throw the army in that direction as well. So he may try and see if he can manage his way to wiggle through the situation without creating a far worse domestic situation, but I'm not entirely sure. He is a psycho, and he could use nukes on anyone, anywhere, at any given time. And so with that, I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Little Beans, who says, happy birthday, Matt. And Little Beans, I thank you very much for the kind birthday wishes, even though it's not my birthday. But thank you very much. Hopefully you didn't think that was serious, but thank you very much. And moving right along, we have a $5 super chat from Justin Noorse, who says, Enforcer, do you think Gazprom caused the Nord Stream leak? If they can prove that it was done by a forced, I think he meant to say force majeure, which is a legal term. He said, then they would benefit the most. And also, Enforcer, do you know what force majeure means?
I believe it's something about violating or breaking a contract.
That is correct.
Oh, well, I got it right. It looks like my Latin lessons in school did me quite well. In fact, y'all may be surprised. Alabama actually has very extensive Latin classes in their public schools. Something y'all may not know. And I'm lying. We don't. I kind of learned Latin on the side. But anyways, moving on from that. I believe that would be something that the Russians can benefit from. However, to think that the Russians would allow Gazprom to violate their contract, but still damage the Russian economy irreparably, probably for the next few years, is a pretty tough call to make. And I'm not really sure if they would have allowed them to do something like that or not. But then again, that's highly possible. That would be a good reason for the Russians to destroy it.
Enforcer, if the contract was between Gazprom, which is a Russian entity, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it was between them and the European countries, he's saying that can they prove it was done by force majeure? So an inability to carry out the contract, would they benefit the most? I just don't think that contracts in this context are really enforceable, because how do you go about enforcing it? Because right now you have a country that's going haywire, which is Russia, and then you have Europe who wants the gas. I'm just not sure if the contract really has a whole lot of meaning in that situation.
And I would have to agree with Matthew on that one, because contracts and laws don't really seem to pertain much to the Russians anymore. But at the same time, I don't.
Can you imagine one of the people in Europe or somebody, whoever had the contract with Gazprom, going to a Russian court and saying, force majeure, they broke the contract? And then what's Russia's court's going to say? They're definitely not going to back up a European country, because Putin would come down on the judge really hard.
Well, interestingly enough, there is actually a historical context that it was going to blow your mind. The 1903 Springfield is a gun that was designed heavily off of the German Mauser. In fact, it's the bolt's a copy, which is a whole interesting story in its own right about the Spanish-American War and such. But you can see the gun right there, and I also have one. Anyways, moving on from that, Mauser rifle. I'll show you all this one. Images. Come on, I'm trying to show you the Mauser. The Mauser, baby. Here we go. The Mauser rifle. And you can see very similar bolt. This may not be the exact Mauser, but we'll just run with it for now. Well, wait a minute. There it is. And there's the bolt for the 1903. You can tell practically identical. In fact, the bolt carrier handle is the exact same nearly. Anyways, it was a direct copy. It was a violation of Mauser's patent on the bolt. And so, the Mauser company sued Springfield in a U.S. court, and they ended up winning. And so Springfield, every time they manufactured in 1903, they had to pay royalties to the Mauser Company. World War I came around. The United States joined World War I in 1917, and during World War I, while we were fighting and killing Germans, the Springfield Company was still paying royalties to the Mauser Company. So there is instances where that has worked, because you would think that at that point the United States would go, we're not paying royalties to the Mauser Company in Germany, but they did.
But that was the Mauser Company coming to the United States courts to file the lawsuit?
Yeah, so it's kind of like what you're saying about a German company going to a Russian court. A German company came to American court, filed the lawsuit, won, and then it was still upheld even during wartime against the Germans by the U.S. So,
although I will say that the United States was very zealous in making sure that we were being fair, but I don't think Russia would reciprocate that in their court system.
That's probably true, but there still is a historical instance out there to show that, at least in one instance with the United States, that, I guess you could say, that breach of, violation of patent was actually upheld. But still, I'm not really sure with the Russians. I feel like they probably wouldn't uphold that even if they did break the contract. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Squamous Amos, who says, "Happy birthday, Enforcer Matt." And wow, thank you very much, Squamous Amos, once more for wishing me another happy birthday. And thank you very much. I'm still curious to know if the people that are saying happy birthday know that it was a joke, or do they think it was serious? That'd be really fascinating to know. But thank you, Squamous, for the support once more. And moving right along, we have a $5 super chat from Cade Riddle, who says, "Evening, everyone. Can I buy a question for someone, please?" And Cade, of course. And thank you very much for the support. And this one is sponsored by Cade Riddle. And the question goes to, looking through here, Rai, who says, "Did you or the Enforcer find those videos allegedly showing Chinese vehicles in Ukraine?"
I have not seen that video, but I will try and look around to see if I can find it. And so with that, I hope I answered that question fairly well. And I'm sorry that it was a short one. I'm trying to hang in here and survive over here, so those answers are getting a little bit shorter. But I do thank you so much for sponsoring a live chat question. That was very kind of you, and I hope I was able to answer that question, although briefly, well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And real quick here, while my spreadsheet catches up, our next super chat is from William Allen, who puts in a $5 donation and says, "Enforcer and Enforcer Matt, would you bammies rather they noodle for fish?"
What?
What does noodle for fish mean?
Oh, noodle, like stick your hand down in the catfish cave and then have the thing like break your arm because it's like a mammoth of a creature. We don't do that. Matthew and me don't do that. I've known someone who did that. They broke their arm. But I've never done that myself, and I don't think I ever will, considering the horror stories I've heard of that stuff. So with that, I hope that does address the comment fairly well, and thank you once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, a big shout out to Lewis Highsmith and WL for each putting in a $5 super chat, and thank you very much to both of you for the support. And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Jeff Curtis, who says, "This war is nothing but Putler's genocide against Ukraine and Russian ethnic minorities."
And I would agree. It's been almost that from the start, and we can see that if it's, of course, for strategic reasons, but we can also see how how they view the Ukrainians as a lower people, almost like the Germans did to a lot of people in the Second World War. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. Hope I addressed that comment fairly well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
All right. And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Bud, who says, "First, I thought Matt was oldest until the face reveal. Now I'm shocked to learn that Matt is actually the elder after the HBD shenanigans, Slava Ukraini." And what are HBD shenanigans?
I don't know what that is, but I do
Is that happy birthday shenanigans?
Apparently so, I guess. But I do thank you for the support. And of course, Matthew is the older of the two. He's actually 22 years old and I'm 20. And just in case if there's still any shock factor left in that. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. Hope that does address the comment. And we are on to the next one.
All right. And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Voidtech CYVR, who says, "My message, if I am president of America, Hey Putler, you have 48 hours to leave Ukraine. If not, you will be destroyed. 8 months is enough now for the time to stop that war. He would not change.
Pretty good message. I would have to say it's quite a good one, and I do agree with the sentiments. And so I'd have to say pretty good response. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope I did address that comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
And up next, we have a $3 super chat from Island Times, who says, if Russia went nuclear, I was wondering where Russia's 2 underground cities were and how large would define being a city.
I don't know where the underground cities are, and due to time constraints, unfortunately, I can't pull them up. And I don't know how big a city would be. I would assume not too large, because building anything underground is very expensive. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again. And before we move on, how many do we have left, Matthew?
We have about 5.
All right. And so with that, on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $2 super chat from CA Lags, who says, encircled with no way out equals sitting duck for drone.
Oh, and I do agree, and I think we're going to be seeing the Russians take on a lot of casualties if they don't surrender soon in Lyman. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. Hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $2 super chat from Non Krestiva, who says, what do you think about the Serbian government supporting Putin? Do you think a second front might be open on the Balkans? And thank you for your work, guys.
And thank you so much for enjoying our work. And the Serbians supporting the Russians, that's just par for the course. The Serbians have always done that historically. I guess you could say the Russians and the Serbians have a special relationship. Why? I have to go through history to go find out why. But I don't think a second front would open, and I just think that they're just being delusional and living in a fantasy land down there. And so with that, I hope that does address the comment fairly well, and thank you once again for the support.
And up next, we have a $2 super chat from Samantha Poole, who says, this is for a live chat question. And thank you very much for the support. And the live chat question goes to, let's see here, goes to Happy Dragon, who says, if the U.S. is taking the threat of using nuclear weapons seriously, why do we have to wait until they are used? Why can't we just speed up giving Ukraine what it needs to just win?
Well, there's only so many, I guess you could say, pieces of equipment that the Ukrainians can actually field before their army just doesn't have the crews or the manpower to field them. And so I believe we've given them everything we can without just having extra equipment just lying around not being used and most likely not maintained. So with that in mind, I would have to say we're doing the best we can. I think the Ukrainians are doing the best they can, and the war is just going on how it's going on. I know that's kind of a lame cop-out, but with that, I hope that does answer the question fairly well, and thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $2 super chat from Nicholas R., who says, Iraq is far from stabilized.
I would say Iraq is not exactly stabilized, but I would say that they're about as stable as one gets in the Middle East these days. Even the Saudi Arabians deal with a lot of, I guess you could say, problems nowadays. But with that, I hope that does address the comment, and thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $1 super chat from Tim Starr and also E. Graham Graham, who does not leave a comment. But thank you very much, Tim and Graham, for your support, and we do appreciate you both very much. And that rounds out our super chats for the night. And once again, to all of our super chatters and everyone else who puts in the kind words in the live chat, thank you very much for your support. It does mean a whole lot to us, and we do appreciate it. So, we are now going to move on to our live chat questions. And Enforcer, about how many do you want to answer?
I think due to how I'm feeling tonight, which isn't great, we're only going to be answering live chats for the next 5 minutes. I'm sorry about the short time frame, but I don't feel well. So I'm trying to get off as quick as possible now. So with that, we are on to the first one.
All right, and the first one is the Morse code. And tonight is just Mark Hodges who figured it out. He says tonight's Morse reads, the 5th Combined Arms Army combined the aspects of sucking and losing very well. Slava Ukraini.
You got correct, Mark Hodges. Ding, 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 ding. That is the Morse code message. And so with that, thank you so much for deciphering it. And I hope y'all enjoyed that funny little joke right near the very end of the stream. Still with 4,700 people watching, which always blows me away, is that this is considered the downtime on stream. And usually we have a live audience that's like 4 or 5 times larger than almost any other streamer that covers Ukraine war news, which is just weird. But with that, we're on to the next one. And thank you once again, Mark Hodges, for always deciphering the Morse code. Sadly, it looks like Ashley and WF2U couldn't join you tonight. But with that, we're on to the next one.
All right. And up next, we have a question from Chris, who says, did I hear correctly that Putin's Wagner Group thugs were in Lyman?
I didn't hear that. I heard that the 5th Combined Arms Army of the Red Banner is in Lyman, but I did not hear that the Wagner Group is there. As far as I know, the Wagner Group is based out of Kadivka, and they're most likely in the area of Soledar or Bakhmut as of right now. And so with that, I hope that answers the question. And with that, we're on to the next one.
All right. And next up, big shout out to NATO Enjoyer for putting in a $5 super chat and says, go to sleep. Good night, boys.
And thank you so much for the support, NATO Enjoyer. But one thing I got to say is we always have to make sure that we answer live chat questions. And if super chats are sent in, I have an obligation to answer all of them. They're the reason that this channel keeps running, and I owe everything to these people who support us and keep us rolling. Every single one of them, even if it's just $1, even if it's $500, I owe it to them to make sure to address their support and thank them for it. And then I want to make sure that we answer live chats, because I don't want to make the premise. I have seen some people out there monetize just their sheer existence, where you have to pay to interact with them. I've looked at one person, it's like, you pay me $100 a month, I'll play a game with you. I don't want to be like that. I always want to make sure that there is a level of accessibility that y'all have, where y'all can just talk to me and I will be able to answer y'all. And so I always want to make sure we answer live chats for that reason. Even if I don't feel good, even if it's very late at night and the stream's gone on for 3 hours and 17 minutes, I always want to make sure that I owe it to every single one of y'all to talk to y'all, to thank y'all for y'all's support, and to answer questions if y'all have any of me. And so that's why we're still here. But I do thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does address why I overwork, because I enjoy y'all a lot and I respect who y'all are. That's how much y'all are worth to me, is that I'll overwork for y'all. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and we did have one more super chat come in, this time from Paul P, who, puts in a $8 super chat and says, your thoughts on the terribly filthy conditions in the conscripts' barracks and conscripts being left in fields without tents, food, etc.
Well, I thank you for the support, Paul. And to answer that question, it's abysmal. No conscripts should ever be put in those kinds of conditions. Never seen anything like it in the modern world. You would have seen something like that in World War II, in the staging leading up to the Normandy invasion and other places around Europe. But never in the modern day has anything like that been seen. It's filth. It's just absolute debauchery. It's terrible. And so with that, I hope that does address the comment, Paul. And thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And so with that, we're going to be answering 2 more questions from the live chat, and then our stream will round out to a close. And so with that, on to the second to last one.
All right, and this one goes to Fabio Benatti, who says, if NATO accepts Ukraine, wouldn't that open the possibility of Putin considering that a declaration of war?
Can you reread that again?
If NATO accepts Ukraine, wouldn't that open the possibility of Putin considering that a declaration of war?
I don't think so. I think that would almost be similar to Russia trying to annex the 4 oblasts that they have holdings in right now. It would be legitimized by most of the world, Ukraine joining NATO, but I don't think it would lead Russia into thinking that's a declaration of war, unless NATO forces entered the country and started to base there and also fight the Russians. And so with that, I hope that answers that question. And we are on to the final one of the night. And so who's the lucky last person who threw in the lucky last question of the night?
And that viewer is M. Savina, who says, do you know if USA is still holding back on certain equipment to send?
Yes, we are holding back on fighter aircraft, and I believe our Patriot missile defense systems due to national security reasons. But the tanks, I'm not exactly sure why, because we have sent M1A1s to Australia, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, among many others. And so I think those tanks aren't being sent over because there's a massive, I guess you could say, gap in between Russian tanks, how they operate and how they're used, and how Western tanks are operated and used. And I think that may be why we haven't sent that over. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, and we have finally made it to the end of tonight's stream. I thank you all so much for watching. Of course, there are 4,624 of y'all who are still on here at the very end of this night's stream, 3 hours, 20 minutes, and 40 seconds in. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here tonight and cover this news, and of course, conversate with all of y'all, and answer questions, and just talk about the war in Ukraine. It's been an absolute honor, and I thank you all so much once again for both of y'all's support, y'all's kind words, and being members of the Lee Spring Army. I will see you all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover day 221 of the war in Ukraine. Thank you all so much once again, and I will see you then. Good night, take care, and stay safe.